Chapter 545. The Tomb of Immortals in Fengdu City was targeted by Wang Lu as his next destination. After spending a few months to sort himself out, Wang Lu began to take action seriously. In addition to awakening his previous life's consciousness, the other important significance of that time travel dream was that it made Wang Lu aware of the existence of a great crisis. Therefore, he could no longer do things as casually and aimlessly as before. Before the time travel dream, Wang Lu actually didn't have much urgency in cultivation. His status in Lingjian school was special, and he had already become famous even before he reached the small success stage of non-phase method. After defeating Chonghua in one fell swoop in the battle for the 5 Blood Spirit Crown, Wang Lu had faintly established his position as the #1 person among his peers. Thus, the motivation to continue to move forward would naturally be lacking. At the same time, for cultivators with Void Spirit Root, the highest dream of cultivators, ascending to immortality was basically an inevitability. As long as he cultivated step by step, ascending to immortality was a matter of course. Therefore, there was no need for Wang Lu to be anxious in cultivation. Plus, the overall environment of 9 regions was peaceful and comfortable. Therefore, he had always been relatively casual in doing things. Many times he was pushed by things instead of actively looking for things to do because there was no need. But now the situation was different. The threat of the fallen immortals was like a sword hanging over his head, and with his current strength, he was afraid that he was not even qualified to be cannon fodder. In the Great War of Immortals, everyone below the level of Supreme was like an ant, and Emir King Pill was not even qualified to be a guest in the art troupe to play cute and send warmth to the front line. Therefore, speeding up the progress of cultivation was an inevitable choice. As for the methods to speed up the progress of cultivation, there were only 2. The first one was the safest. Return to Spirit Sword Mountain. Ask the elders of Heavenly Sword Hall to help him find a place with rich spiritual energy, occupy it, and then do a closed-door training. After a few decades when he came out, he would at least be a Taoist master of Yuanying stage. However, there were 2 problems with this method. First, although the Lingjian school still had abundant spiritual vein resources, there were also a lot of people who needed the spiritual vein to cultivate, such as the elders of the Heavenly Sword Hall, Lu Li, Zhu Shiyao, and the other successor disciples of the Misty Peak, as well as some other cultivators who were separated from the disciples but still cultivated on the mountain. Second, reaching Yuanying stage in several decades was too slow. Although it was better than a certain non-phase peak master who hadn't reached Yuanying stage in 200 years, it was still far from meeting the needs of Wang Lu. In that case, he could only take the second path, to seek a breakthrough in actual combat. This path had always been regarded as a shortcut for geniuses. As long as the aptitude and perception were high enough, the life was big enough, and they were not afraid of the karma of killing, then a life and death test could indeed make people's strength advance by leaps and bounds. The best example in history was Immortal Qin and Great Ancestor Desheng, the 2 people who ascended to immortality in just 20 years of cultivation. Such an appalling cultivation speed, in addition to their Void Spirit Root, the most important reason was that they rose in troubled times. From the moment they set foot on the road of immortal cultivation, they were involved in the flames of war, which lasted for almost 20 years without a break. And when the war subsided, they had already ascended to immortality. Unfortunately, the theme of today's 9 regions was peace and development, so it was difficult to find a huge battlefield where people could fight for 20 years. Fortunately, a group of immortal tombs was unearthed in the southern heaven region. The endless copies provided endless battlefields. As long as the cultivation state was switched to the wartime state, one could obtain huge benefits from the battles. Of course, in addition to the above reasons, Wang Lu also had other purposes. The news of him and Lu Li should have already been passed back to the mountain. During this time there was no movement on Spirit Sword Mountain. Obviously, they had guessed that Wang Lu had some difficulties, so they waited for him to take the initiative to return to the mountain. However, Wang Lu asked himself that he was not ready to reunite with them, especially her. Moreover, it seemed that it would not be easy to prepare in a short period of time. However, always floating outside was not a long-term solution, especially since the master of non-phase peak had always been impatient. It was estimated that it would not be long before she came to find him. Therefore, it was better to go to the group of immortal tombs in Plentiful City to hide. In the independent copy, no matter how great her ability was, it would be useless, ha ha ha. When Wang Lu made up his mind to go to the group of immortal tombs in Plentiful City, on the Red Pine Mountain in the southern heaven region, Xiaobaya, the master of Reaching Firmament Palace, deeply frowned. His eyes were full of helplessness. Xianying still refuses to come out? In front of Xiaobaya, a woman who looked to be in her 30s with a flirtatious expression gently shook her head. He still refuses. He said that he will not come out until he breaks through this tribulation. Xiaobaya was silent for a moment, and then asked, "Then did you tell him that it was my order for him to come out?" The woman said, "He said that after he comes out, he will come to you to offer a humble apology." Bastard! Xiaobaya flew into a rage. In a split second, the thousands of red pine trees outside Reaching Firmament Palace swayed, and the red pine needles became crystal clear, as if they were weeping blood. Offer a humble apology? Offer a humble apology to me, his master? Who wants him to offer a humble apology? What's the use of offering a humble apology? He is the lead disciple of Reaching Firmament Palace, and every word and deed is the model for the disciples of the palace. Now, everyone knows that my words as the palace master have no weight. When the woman heard Xiaobaya's roar, she suddenly raised her eyebrows. Isn't it because you spoil him so much that he is lawless? Usually, he doesn't have the slightest majesty as a master. Even the most precious red pine tree of Reaching Firmament Palace has been given to him, and you can't wait to announce that he will inherit the position of palace master. Even when you are with him, you don't put on any airs. Now you expect your words to have weight. How is that possible? Humph, that year, master evaluated you and said that you are competent to be the palace master of Reaching Firmament Palace, but you are not a qualified teacher. This is indeed true. Xiaobaya's face turned red from being refuted. After a long silence, he stood up. I'll go pull him out. Forget it. The woman pulled Xiaobaya back again. He is now in a closed-door training. If this tribulation of emotions is not over, you can forcibly pull him out, but you will just pull out a walking corpse. Otherwise, do you think I will leave him alone and come back alone? Alas, tell me, is this tribulation of emotions really so difficult? You're spouting nonsense. Xiaobaya glared at her. You also cultivate the cultivation method of Reaching Firmament Palace. For cultivators of Reaching Firmament Palace, don't you know what the tribulation of emotions means? The woman shrugged her shoulders. I didn't feel that the tribulation of emotions that year was difficult. After my vows of eternal love were broken up by the elders, I was forced to marry you. You see, it only took me half a month to adjust to such a big setback. You. Xiaobaya suddenly became even more annoyed, but looking at his wife who had a cold relationship with him, he did not know what to say for a long time, and finally helplessly deflated. In short, what are you going to do with this traitorous disciple? I can't just leave him alone. Xianying's aptitude and temperament are too extreme. He can't rely on himself to cross the tribulation of emotions. Xiaobaya pondered for a long time. So I have to take action. You take action? Don't tell me. Well, the knot in his heart is that it's rare for him to be moved and want to pursue a person, but he was defeated without a fight. His feelings have not yet begun and it has already ended, which makes him unwilling. Xianying is not a narrow-minded villain. If he is defeated in a fair competition, it will only make his mind more mature. But now he has walked into a dead end, so I have to pull him out. How? Xiaobaya was silent for a moment, and then said, help him create a fair competition opportunity. Don't tell me you want to use the marriage chart. Are you crazy? Do you know how much backlash you will suffer if you interfere with the marriage of cultivators, especially the cultivators of other sects? Moreover, that person is a successor disciple of Lingjian school. Even if her cultivation base is still shallow, she represents one of the 5 uniques of the Wanxian League. If someone finds out you don't want your life? Xiaobaya said, of course, I will not overestimate myself and forcibly interfere with other people's marriage. In fact, I can't interfere. But what if I push the boat along with the current in a certain matter? While speaking, Xiaobaya took down a thick book from the bookshelf. The whole book was crimson red, which was actually woven from thousands of red pine needles. There were no words on the cover of the book. Xiaobaya picked up the pen, pondered for a long time, and then wrote 2 words on it. Wang Lu. Wang Lu. The woman was surprised. How could it be him? Didn't they say that Luli is a lily? Xiao Baiya coldly humphed. Do you really believe that kid Wang Lu's nonsense? Lily. How could he think of that? That Luli has long been in love with him. And he also treats Luli differently. But Xianying said he didn't see a real love line between the 2 of them. Humph, what can he see with that insignificant skill of his? However, the 2 of them have not officially established a relationship. The love line between them can only be regarded as a potential line, which is very difficult to observe. At the same time, even if it is destroyed, the karmic backlash would be very small. Of course, for the sake of insurance, I will not do it directly. As Xiao Baiya spoke, he slowly and painstakingly wrote down the marriage chart. Destroying marriage is an absolute taboo for the cultivators of reaching Firmament Palace. If it is not necessary, this kind of spell should not be easily used. However, the cultivators of reaching Firmament Palace have been studying the way of marriage for thousands of years, so if they want to do something, they will always have the means. While speaking, Xiao Baiya's arm began to tremble slightly and beads of sweat oozed from his forehead. For a supreme-level cultivator, this kind of magical power consumption was already earth-shattering. And what kind of effect would such a terrifying force have on a mere king pill cultivator? What are you doing? To deal with a king pill level junior, you even used your true yuan. Do you want him to be alone for a lifetime? Xiao Baiya finally finished writing the last word, immediately closed the marriage chart, and then smiled tiredly at his wife. On the contrary, the chapter 1 just wrote is called Xiao Luo Field. At the same time on Spirit Sword Mountain, Wang Wu looked at Feng Yin Taoist master in front of her with great surprise. What? A new immortal dreamland has appeared in the group of immortal tombs? Only beauties below King Pill stage can enter? So you want me to take Yao Er, Shixian, Xinyao, and that stupid cat to Plentiful City? Huh. Even little Ling Er? She's not. Well, I have no opinion. As long as your budget is generous, it doesn't matter how many people there are, ha ha ha. Chapter 546. There are so many people here. Is there any new activity in Plentiful City recently? Walking on the streets of Plentiful City, Wang Lu saw pedestrians rubbing shoulders with one another. The streets and alleys were surging with people. Moreover, most of the people were female cultivators from various sects, which made Plentiful City look like a country of women. The last time he saw such a surging crowd was shortly after the opening ceremony of the group of immortal tombs. At that time, the committee invited the most famous girl idol group in 9 regions to perform at a high price. The star chasers who heard the news almost flattened Plentiful City. At that time, the cultivators who were on duty for public security were so busy that their resentment soared to the sky. In the end, the committee gave them 10 times the reward to suppress it, which left a deep impression on Wang Lu. At this time the scene reappeared, but the gender was reversed. Wang Lu immediately became curious. So many young women have gathered here. Could it be that the mysterious Sky Mansion has recently promoted a young idol group? TSK, the mysterious Sky Mansion has finally figured it out. There's nothing better to earn money than women in this world. I've already suggested it to them, but no one took it seriously. Speaking of which, Luli, haven't you been doing experiential learning in Plentiful City recently? Have you heard about these things? Luli shook her head. I haven't heard of any idol group. The girl bought a few bags of fried fruit on the street and muttered, there are so many people in Plentiful City now because some time ago, several big sects have jointly broken through a big ring of immortal dreamlands, which opened a new batch of immortal dreamlands in the group of immortal tombs. It is said that the income is very rich. Oh, a batch? So it's a group of immortal dreams? The strategy group could actually make such progress? Unexpectedly, that group of people is quite capable. But what kind of group of immortal dreams could it have such a big attraction? Moreover, why are they all women? With the deepening of the development of the group of immortal tombs by the Wanxian League, more and more rules have been explored, and the understanding of the rules of the group of immortal tombs and immortal dreamlands has been different from the past. In the beginning, when the group of immortal tombs created different immortal dreamlands, they were highly independent and did not interfere with each other. Thousands of immortal dreamlands were independent and unrelated to each other. However, It didn't take long for a series of immortal dreamlands to appear. The content of the dreamlands became relatively fixed, and there was a relationship between them. Later on, there was even the concept of immortal dreams. That was not long after Wang Lu and the others fought for the 5 blood spirits crown. The exploration team discovered that after that battle, a large number of immortal dreamlands appeared in the group of immortal tombs. The content of the dreamland was highly solidified, and the randomness was greatly reduced. However, the income became more abundant. In an ordinary immortal dreamland, even an elite cultivator would often only have a small gain. Spiritual treasure level treasures were almost legendary. Wang Lu's Devil Jade was something that could only be found by chance. But in this fixed immortal dreamland, spiritual treasures and other items were not uncommon. Of course, based on the principle of equivalent exchange, spiritual treasures were not so easy to obtain. Moreover, these treasures were not renewable resources. Once someone took a treasure from an immortal dream, that immortal dream would be permanently closed. At that time, after the 5 blood spirits crown, the group of immortal dreams was repeatedly attacked by the exploration team day and night. In only 3 or 4 months it was completely developed. The 5 uniques of the Wanxian League and several other top-rank sects almost divided up all the benefits. Later, they found out that the immortal dreamland was permanently closed, and the resentment of those small and medium-sized sects was almost substantial. Therefore, since then, the management committee was forced to hold an emergency meeting to formulate a management method for the development of the group of immortal dreams and rationally allocate resources. Unfortunately, after that, there was no new group of immortal dreams for a long time. After all, the collision between the lead disciples of the 5 uniques of the Wanxian League was not something that could be seen everywhere. Wang Lu initially thought that there would not be a new group of immortal dreams for 3 to 5 years. Unexpectedly, the exploration team was more capable than expected. "I don't know about the group of immortal dreams," Lu Li said. "Master said that I should not be distracted in the immortal dream land. I just need to do my own cultivation step by step." Wang Lu said with a smile, "Uncle Zhou is an experienced and prudent person, but I don't think we need to be so conservative." "Huh. It's nothing, let's go first." In Wang Lu's mind, if 9 regions could continue to be peaceful for generations, then of course it was good to be a bit more experienced and prudent. Lu Li was now in the last stage of cultivating the core before achieving the King Pill. Her every move would affect the quality of the King Pill in the future, and even the success or failure of the King Pill. The brilliant sword heart that she cultivated was a method that was inclined to erupt. During the period of cultivating the core, a little bit of carelessness could lead to the eruption of the core, and everything would fall short of success. Zhou Ming and the others had experienced a great calamity, so they were particularly sensitive to the fall of geniuses. Therefore, it was certainly good to seek stability. And from Wang Lu's point of view, he didn't want a girl with a temperament like Lu Li to experience any ups and downs. This kind of pure and dirty state of mind was like a work of art. However, the reality was, in the turbulent years, the most damaged thing was the so-called works of art. Wang Lu didn't know when the crisis of the fallen immortal would fully break out, but he thought that his generation should be able to see it, so. "Lu Li, are you interested in the immortal dreamland?" Lu Li thought for a moment. "I don't know, I've never thought about it," Wang Lu said with a smile. "The last time I went to the immortal dreamland, the background was set in the demon world continent. The food culture of the demon race is really interesting. Take the barbarians of Flaming Valley as an example. Although their civilization is backward, and their cooking methods are very open, seemingly rough, but the special environment produces special ingredients, which is unique. For example, there's a lava fruit, which has a unique taste. It has the freshness and sweetness of a fruit, but when it enters the mouth, it's like a volcanic eruption, and the taste bursts out in an instant. Senior brother, don't think of me as a fool who only knows how to eat." Lu Li protested unhappily, and then swallowed her saliva. "That lava fruit," Wang Lu shrugged. "When it leaves the environment of Flaming Valley, it will go bad, so it's useless to put it in the mustard seed bag. At that time I didn't have a special storage item, so I had to give it up. What a pity." Lu Li's eyes were lost in thought, apparently already fantasizing about the taste of the lava fruit. "Actually, it's not just the lava fruit. There are all kinds of stages in the immortal dreamland, so what rare delicacies can't be seen there? Yes, unfortunately, Master said. Wang Lu said. When did Uncle Zhou tell you that? Lu Li replied, more than 3 months ago. When I first entered the Dan cultivating stage, Master told me. But now 3 months have passed. The time has changed, so the effect of the words would also change, right? Lu Li was stunned. Is that so? That's right. For example, after breakfast you say that you're full, but what about at noon? Are you going to say that I'm hungry? Lu Li nodded. Yes. That's why Uncle Zhou told you not to enter the immortal dreamland 3 months ago. But now it's not necessarily effective. If it's necessary, it's only natural for you to enter the immortal dreamland for experiential learning. But Lu Li still seemed hesitant. Wang Lu then continued, as the old saying goes, an elder brother is like a father. Now that your master is not here, I, as your senior brother, am the same as your master. Lu Li froze for a moment and then reluctantly nodded. Then I'll go to the immortal dreamland to have a look. Let's start with something simple. Moreover, I'll be accompanying you. Hearing that Wang Lu would accompany her, Lu Li no longer had any doubts. After entering the entrance of the group of immortal tombs with Lu Li, Wang Lu was taken aback by the sudden bright scene in front of him. In his line of sight, it was no longer the initial bright galaxy, but an incomparably wide square. There were many doors around the square, and each of the doors had a building. Many cultivators were walking in and out of the building, looking very busy. After a few months of absence, the group of immortal tombs had changed a lot. It was not an exaggeration to describe it as changing with each passing day. He still remembered that at the beginning, the outside of Plentiful City was full of flowers, but the inside was like a piece of barren land. During this period of time, the cultivators finally penetrated their own power into the group of immortal tombs. The square behind the door was not the arrangement of Dixian, but the deciphering and transformation of the group of immortal tombs by the Plentiful City Management Committee. People classified the entrance to the immortal dreamland, which could, to a certain extent, realize the artificial selection of the content of the immortal dreamland. Although the artificial selection would make the theoretical income lower than that of completely random, in fact, because the content of the immortal dreamland was controllable, the income would increase. Therefore, most of the cultivators who entered the group of immortal tombs would artificially choose the content of the immortal dreamland. He saw a long line in front of a door in the square. Most of the cultivators who came from the entrance of the group of immortal tombs were lined up behind this line. Obviously, this was the entrance to the group of immortal dreams that caused the crowd in Plentiful City. Thinking of the report that he received as a member of the management committee about the record of the group of immortal dreams, Wang Lu could not help but be moved. Right now he was anxious to have a breakthrough in his cultivation base, so the group of immortal dreams was the best choice. In the last group of immortal dreams, even the immortal treasure appeared out of nowhere. Unfortunately, the exploration team failed to get it even after a lot of hard work. However, if it were him, it would be difficult to obtain the treasure of Swan Xian, but at least it was better than the random immortal dreamland. At the very least, a great killing weapon like the 5 Blood Spirits crown would never be seen in a random solo match. Thinking of this, Wang Lu pulled Lu Li and went straight to the door of the group of immortal dreams. As for the long line in front of the door, he completely turned a blind eye to it. As a member of the management committee and the discoverer of the group of immortal tombs, he had countless privileges here, so the VIP passage was just a small matter. Seeing this, the cultivators in the queue gnashed their teeth, but they could do nothing about it. However, when he and Lu Li flew to the door, they were stopped by a middle-aged clerk with King Pill cultivation base. "Excuse me, please wait a moment." Upon hearing this, Wang Lu stopped. "What? Do I also need to line up?" "You must be joking. You're going through the VIP passage, so of course you don't need to line up. However, this group of immortal dreams can only be entered by women. The people around you can enter, but you can't." "Only women can enter? What's the reason?" The clerk said with a wry smile. "This is not our intention to make things difficult, but the rules of the group of immortal dreams are like this. Even if a man tries to barge in, he would only be blocked by a powerful array. Some time ago, the management committee tried to crack the rules, but even the Supreme couldn't do anything about it. Instead, he was injured by the backlash. As for now, do you see any male cultivators in the queue behind you? Even if there are, they're only here to send their female companions. They can't go in themselves. Wang Lu looked back and sure enough that was the case. No wonder Plentiful City has almost become a country of women these days. Turns out to be like this. The clerk said, "That's right, the income of this group of immortal dreams is very enviable. Unfortunately, it's not fated with the male cultivators in the world." Encountering such an unforeseen event at the last moment, Wang Lu, of course, was unwilling. He thought about it and asked, "How does this group of immortal tombs judge the difference between men and women? Physical or psychological?" Upon hearing this, the clerk was startled. "You're not thinking of," Wang Lu said with a smile, "I'm just asking. To be honest with you, there are many people who have the same idea. Relatively speaking, the standard of the group of immortal tombs is very strict. It must be a standard female. Let alone a man with a woman's body. Even a woman who is not good-looking can't go in. There's such a rule. Yes, this group of immortal dreams is indeed strange. Look behind you, isn't the average quality very high?" Wang Lu looked back. "There are many exceptions." The clerk wryly smiled. "Therefore, a large part of our daily work is to persuade them to accept the reality after they are turned away." I see." Thinking to this, Wang Lu was helpless. After sending off the clerk, he turned around and asked Luli, "Luli, do you think?" He saw Luli very generously nodded. "No problem, I can do it alone." Senior brother, rest assured. Wang Lu was suddenly speechless. Originally, he wanted to ask, "Do you think we should change the place?" However, it was rare for Luli to be so enthusiastic. So Wang Lu didn't want to dispel her interest in the immortal dreamland. Therefore he said, "Very well, you can do it. Remember to be careful, don't try to be brave." I'll remember." With that, Luli strode away. Wang Lu looked at her back, but he couldn't put his mind at ease. Seeing that her back was about to disappear into the darkness, Wang Lu suddenly remembered that there were a lot of props in his mustard seed bag that he could use. Thus, he stepped forward and prepared to give them to her. "Be careful, don't go any further." At this time, the clerk's voice came from behind him. Upon hearing this, Wang Lu was stunned. Just as he was about to step back, it was already too late. He felt a strong suction coming from the front, and he was involuntarily sucked in. A black hole opened in front of him, and a huge whirlpool began to spin wildly. Behind him, the clerk was dumbfounded. He went in. How is this possible? Beside him, several male cultivators who came to send their companions were also surprised. Didn't they say that male cultivators can't go in? Did the rule change? Strange, I want to try it too. Then they heard a burst of sound at the door, and several male cultivators flew out, their bodies scorched black. The clerk was even more shocked. The rule hasn't changed, so how did that person go in just now? While thinking about it, he suddenly thought of an incredible possibility. Could it be that the original body of that handsome young man is actually... That's right, if he changed into a woman's dress and did a bit of maintenance, his appearance is actually not bad. However, he remembered that that person was still young and already had a resounding reputation in 9 regions, and his future was limitless. Thus it was better to keep this secret with him for a lifetime. In the end, the clerk could only sigh with emotion. 9 regions was really big, and there were really all kinds of strange things. At the same time, at the entrance of the group of immortal tombs, several women came together. One of them was full of the smell of alcohol, and she was in high spirits, talking incessantly. "Little Ling Air, what do you think of the method I just said? Let that kid Wang Lu use his authority to open a hotel here. With the flow of people here, the business will definitely be booming. Moreover, if you meet a fat sheep, an evil cultivator who doesn't know what's good for him, just knock him out, drag him into the kitchen, plunder his money and treasures, and refine his body and primordial spirit into a magical treasure. Another windfall. Ha ha ha." Chapter 547. When the whirlpool in front of him disappeared, Wang Lu found himself lying next to a clear stream. Not far from him, Luli was happily fishing. Seeing that he had woken up, she flaunted a fish with a branch and shouted, Senior brother, look, I caught a jellyfish." He saw that the fish on the branch was crystal clear and soft, which was indeed similar to jelly. And from the teeth marks on it, Luli could not wait to taste it. Senior brother is right, the immortal dreamland is really powerful, there are everything. Senior brother, look at the fruit on that tree, doesn't it look like a piece of meat? Wang Lu looked up and sure enough on a tree, he saw a sausage-like fruit. He couldn't help but inwardly spit, thinking that the structure of this group of immortal dreams was too uncreative. It was nothing more than a plant and animal exchange, which could only fool a little kid like Luli. However, now was not the time to care about plants and animals. The first question to be solved was, what was this place? Or rather, what kind of immortal dreamland was this? The content of the immortal dreamland was strange. Some emphasized fighting, some forcefully solved mysteries, and some emphasized interpersonal relationship. It was said that some time ago, even food, planting, and other sideline immortal dreamland had been discovered, which made the content of the immortal dreamland even richer. Based on Wang Lu's current needs, what he needed the most was a combat-type immortal dreamland, because compared to any high-level method or magical treasure, what he needed more was to hone himself in actual combat. And it stood to reason that after entering the entrance of the group of immortal dreams, there should be a choice link for him to choose which type of immortal dreamland he wanted to enter. As a result, he didn't know which program had a problem, but that link was skipped, and in the blink of an eye, he came to this strange place. If this immortal dreamland was biased towards the plot, then it would be of little value to Wang Lu. Instead of wasting time here, he might as well give up. Secondly, there was a question. Why did he come to this place? If he remembered correctly, the clerk at the door repeatedly emphasized that only female cultivators could enter, and they must be beautiful female cultivators. Wang Lu didn't think that the clerk was deliberately deceiving him. Luli being able to come in was a matter of course, but what about him? Wang Lu really did not feel that he was a woman. Even if he had a dark history in the ancient sword tomb, if that counted, then the rule that only allowed women to enter would be meaningless. A large number of male cultivators could use similar tricks to sneak in. Speaking of beauty, although he wasn't the rough and bold type, his face and body showed obvious male characteristics. No matter how he looked at it, he didn't fit the definition of a beauty, right? So what was the problem? The demonic jade in his pocket? The problem was, although the magical effect of the demon jade was extraordinary in essence, it was only the most precious treasure of the demon world that was produced in the 5 blood spirit crown instance, so it was impossible for it to affect the entire group of immortal tombs. Or could it be that as the discoverer of the group of immortal tombs, he had an unknown privilege? No, if he really had special privileges, he wouldn't have had to work so hard to clear the 36 chains. There must be some other reason. Senior brother, where are we going next? While Wang Lu was racking his brains, Luli had already finished eating the jellyfish and the preserved meat fruit. With a face full of longing, she asked Wang Lu where to go next. Yes, it's meaningless to meditate here. It's better to walk around and see what this immortal dreamland looks like. The two of them summoned their flying swords and flew straight to the sky. After crossing the vast and dense mountain forest, they saw human settlements in a place surrounded by mountains. It was a bustling and comfortable small town. From a distance, they used their primordial spirit to perceive that there was no particularly powerful individual in the town. Most of them were just mortal creatures. A few of them had a certain cultivation base and magical ability, but at most they were around the level of King Pill. Such a town was the most suitable starting point for the whole instance, the novice village. Let's go down. Hey, wait a minute. Before the flying sword descended, Wang Lu suddenly remembered something and quickly stopped. In theory, this immortal dreamland should be a country of women. The appearance of Wang Lu was absolutely unexpected. Rashly appearing might cause unnecessary trouble. Even if the people here were simple and had no evil intention, it was not fun to be stared at like a rare creature. Therefore, before landing, Wang Lu deliberately used the 5 elements spell to cast an illusion effect on himself, turning himself into a woman. As for the specific image, Wang Lu was too lazy to think about the design, so he directly used his master's image. Although she lacked moral integrity, her face and figure were still good. She was completely different from the ugly duckling girl 150 years ago, a world of difference. Thus, Wang Lu and Lu Li, like a pair of cultivator sisters, descended from the sky into the city. Seeing the appearance of the two people, the people in the city showed just the right amount of surprise. Many curious eyes were cast on them, but there was no fanaticism nor panic. It seemed that in this immortal dreamland, flying on a flying sword was not a rare thing at all. At the same time, Wang Lu also looked at the people around him. As expected, this was really a country of women. The small city was full of women. Moreover, without exception, they were all beautiful women. Most of them seemed to be in their 20s or 30s, which was the golden age of women. Old ones were very rare. Most of these people were just ordinary people, without any immortal cultivation base or any other natural magical ability. However, these people's essence, chi, and spirit were full and exuberant, far better than the mortals in 9 regions. Any one of them could be considered as a 1 in 100 martial arts genius in 9 regions. Moreover, their innate vitality was unusually exuberant, which seemed to explain why the people in the city looked so young. What an interesting immortal dream! Wang Lu muttered to himself and then took Lu Li's hand. Come on, let's go taste the special food here. Oh! Lu Li was elated. Although there were many differences between this small city called Gorgeous Town and the cities in 9 regions, as long as it was a city for people to live in, there would always be similarities. Not long after the two of them walked along the main road in the middle of the small city, they saw a thriving restaurant. The fragrance of the food drifted from afar, which made Lu Li continue to silently swallow. Together with Lu Li, they found a place to sit in the restaurant. After confirming that they could directly pay with gold and silver, they asked the waiter to bring a table full of delicious food. While eating with Lu Li, Wang Lu carefully listened to the people around them. People always talked more at the table than usual. Therefore, conversely, there was no place better to get information than at the table. With Wang Lu's hearing, he could hear the conversation of every table on the 4th floor of the restaurant. In the time it took to eat a meal, Wang Lu had heard enough of the gossip and had a preliminary judgment about the background of this immortal dream. First of all, as he had guessed before, this was definitely a country of women. Because after listening for so long, Wang Lu had never heard anyone mention the word man, as if the concept of man didn't exist in the dictionary of the people in this place. Secondly, this world, or at least the residents of this gorgeous town, were very gentle and kind. There were hundreds of diners on the 4th floor of the restaurant, but there was no quarrel during the meal, which reminded Wang Lu of the new demon world. Thirdly, the people here were not much different from the people in 9 regions. They all had 7 emotions and 6 desires, as well as tea, rice, oil, and salt. Finally, this world was not completely peaceful and prosperous. There were still wars and disputes, and they were not rare. After knowing this, Wang Lu felt relieved. At least he didn't have to worry about not getting any harvest in this immortal dream. However, the few questions that Wang Lu was most concerned about had not been answered. For example, the simplest question: if there were only women in this world, how could they reproduce? Did they have mitosis? Cloning technology? Wang Lu listened for a long time, but he didn't hear people mention the topic of heirs and inheritance. Secondly, what did this world need him to do? When each immortal dreamland was born, there would be an obvious or implicit main plot, or the main contradiction, which ran through the whole immortal dreamland's experiential learning. To put it simply, when the cultivators entered the immortal dreamland, they would soon trigger an event, and then they would embark on a ups and downs adventure. Because the immortal dreamland was, after all, designed by the Dixian people to let the later generations of cultivators practice their experiential learning, not to experience life. However, so far, Wang Lu hasn't been able to find the main plot. In that case, let's go to the temple on the east side of the city. After settling the bill, Wang Lu said to Lu Li, "Temple?" Lu Li curiously asked. "Yes, the temple." Just now, he heard people mention that there was a temple of heaven in the east side of the city, where the entire gorgeous town was enshrined, or the belief of the people in this world, heaven. The Temple of Heaven was a huge religious organization that spread all over the world, and Wang Lu was quite interested in this. A religion with influence all over the world often recorded many truths of the world, because most of the religions actually developed around such questions. Who am I, where do I come from, and where do I go? For example, the God that we believe in created you, you are the people of God, created by God, and in the future you will return to the kingdom of God and so on. Of course, these metaphysical theories were irrelevant, but the important thing was that when religions tried to prove those theories, they would often record history, which was what Wang Lu was eager to understand. Soon after, Wang Lu and Lu Li came to the east side of the city and saw the Temple of Heaven. The temple was simple and unadorned, but in front of the door, there were people coming and going, and the incense was extremely prosperous. At the same time, there was a powerful aura hidden in the temple. The only King Pill-level powerhouse in Gorgeous Town was here. In order to avoid trouble and act in a low-key manner, after entering the temple, Wang Lu imitated other people and bought an ancient book that recorded the religious doctrine, Heaven News, and then quietly left. After buying the book, Wang Lu quickly flipped through the book and found a lot of important information. According to Heaven News, in the earliest days, the world was in a state of ignorance and chaos. At that time, there were also mountains and rivers, birds and beasts, but the living conditions of the creatures were extremely bad, struggling in pain and torture. Then the heaven took pity on all living beings and gathered the essence of the earth in one place, which then floated up from the chaos, stood out, and formed the present world. At that time, those who were selected by the heaven to enter this gathering place were the ancestors of this world. Without exception, they were all women. These women, regardless of their figure, appearance, or aptitude, were all at the top level in the chaotic era. Compared with mortals, they were no different from immortals. Therefore, they were called human immortals, and this world that floated in the sky was called Heavenly Earth. Chapter 548. In addition to the origin of Heavenly Earth, Heaven News also answered the earliest question raised by Wang Lu. This world is made up of women, so how do they reproduce? The answer was, it was bestowed by heaven. In the teachings of the Temple of Heaven, it was stated and stipulated that when two women fell in love with each other and decided to stay together for a lifetime, they would go to the Temple of Heaven to worship heaven, and then communicate with heaven through a special ceremony. If their feelings were recognized by heaven, then they would be given a new life. Seeing this, Wang Lu could not help but sigh with emotion that the heaven of Heavenly Earth was really busy. Even the matter of mating had to be taken care of, but this was undoubtedly a good move. Holding the reproductive rights of Heavenly Earth, of course, it could become a unique belief here. However, interestingly, the heaven here was not a personified existence. Even the totem worshipped in the Temple of Heaven was not a personified idol. Wang Lu's initial guess that the so-called heaven was a personified existence, but now it seemed that it was not necessarily correct. Then, Heaven News also elaborated in detail on the question of where would people go. According to Heaven News, if the human medium immortals of Heavenly Earth achieved success in their cultivation, they could ascend to the immortal world and enjoy eternal freedom. If their qualifications were ordinary, then after a lifetime, their soul would be recovered by the heaven and reincarnated into a new life. If they committed many evils, then after death they would be thrown into the chaotic world. This view of afterlife was quite similar to that of Zen Buddhism. At the same time, Heavenly Earth was a paradise sublimated from the chaotic world, but it did not mean that human medium immortals could sit back and relax. After all, human medium immortals were just human medium immortals, and Heavenly Earth was still human medium immortals. Compared with the immortal world that was rumored to be immortal and eternal, this place was still very immature. And more importantly, the chaotic world still existed, right under the feet of Heavenly Earth, and it was always eyeing the paradise above their heads. In history, the chaotic world had launched dozens of wars of aggression against Heavenly Earth. Although they were repelled every time, if Heavenly Earth was not well prepared, it would suffer huge losses. In Wang Lu's view, this setting was a more intense stimulus measure, so that those later human medium immortals would not lie in the shadow of their ancestors and stop moving forward. After all, although the temptation of becoming an immortal was great, it was not realistic for most of the human immortals. Wouldn't it be better to live a carefree life in the paradise of Heavenly Earth? However, the threat of the primal chaos realm made him give up on this idea. At the same time, in Wang Lu's view, this should also be the main plot of this immortal dream. The chaotic creatures from the lower realm invaded, and then the cultivators who entered the immortal dream, as members of the Heavenly Earth, fought against the invaders bravely. After making great contributions, they returned to the 9 regions with treasures. However, as he continued to read Heaven News, Wang Lu found that in addition to the main plot, there was likely to be a huge subplot, the Temple of Heaven. In the heavenly news, there were almost no detailed records about the creatures of the lower realm, and the dozens of wars of invasion were also somewhat vague. Regarding the dozens of wars against the invasion, the heavenly news only recorded that the Temple of Heaven played a central role in the war, repeatedly guiding the human middle immortals to protect their homeland. However, the detailed process was stingy, and it always emphasized, intentionally or unintentionally, that when the chaotic creatures invaded, the Temple of Heaven would give the necessary shelter to the heavenly earth. However, as for how to define the concept of necessary, it was a very vague concept. It could be assumed that it was closely related to people's devotion to the Temple of Heaven. It seems that this Temple of Heaven is simply the hegemon of the heavenly earth. After reading the complete heaven news, Wang Lu could not help but frown. There was no need to say much about the strength of the Temple of Heaven. The most powerful person in the entire city was the King Pill of the Temple of Heaven. The rest were nothing, simply a crane in a flock of chickens. Of course, strength was not the problem. The problem was how the Temple of Heaven used this strength. Judging from the tendency of the heaven news, the Temple of Heaven seemed to have no intention to let other people participate in the war. According to the intentional or unintentional guidance of the heaven news, it seemed that when the chaotic creatures invaded, other people only needed to burn incense and worship the heaven in the temple, and everything else could be handed over to the monks of the temple. But wasn't this tantamount to guiding others to destroy their own martial arts? It was not a good thing to pin all hope on the temple and completely lose their own will to struggle. Moreover, this was also inconsistent with the original intention of the heaven. The sublimation of the heavenly earth and the chaotic creatures of the lower realm was to give the human immortals and their descendants enough intensity. Now that the Temple of Heaven had taken over everything, where was the incentive? Of course, this kind of thing was not uncommon in 9 regions. Whether it was a religious organization or a political organization later on, they were often the first to abandon their own beliefs. The Temple of Heaven had been developing in the heavenly earth for thousands of years, so it was not surprising that there would be such a change. And if one wanted to dig deeper, this would be another big plot line. After Wang Lu figured out the Temple of Heaven from the darkest angle, he finally had a preliminary outline of this immortal dreamland in his mind. A big main line and a big sideline, which was the focus of this time. Wang Lu considered for a while and decided to use the main line as the core to carry out the strategy. After all, compared with the sideline of resisting the evil rule of the Temple of Heaven, it was more interesting to detonate the war between the two worlds. Especially the plot of leading a group of beautiful girls to bravely resist the invasion of the chaotic tentacles. Of course, one of the problems in the main plot was that he, a man, should not appear in this country of women. Once his male identity was discovered, it was likely that he would be regarded as a strange chaotic creature from the lower realm. At that time, he would face the dilemma of being attacked from both front and back by his teammates. And how could it be easy to hide his identity? Wang Lu's self-proclaimed mastery in illusion was not excellent. It was fine to fool an ordinary King Pill, but if he met a Yuanying stage expert, he would definitely be seen through at a glance. And once the war between the two worlds broke out, let alone Yuanying stage, even a Taoist master of deity stage would not be new. However, on second thought, there was also an opportunity hidden behind the crisis. Right now, he was the only man in the heavenly earth. According to the law of scarcity, he was even rarer than a supreme-level powerhouse. This was clearly a unique advantage. Hey, is this the real meaning of the existence of this immortal dreamland? The war between the two worlds, the Temple of Heaven, are all just pretenses. The hidden plot of this level is the key. I will use my super weapon to let these women who have never seen a man and can only grind tofu every day taste the real taste of meat. From now on, they will become my exclusive meat slaves. No, that would be too vulgar. I should explain it from another perspective. The point of this level is to use my enthusiasm to correctly guide the values of these women and promote the restoration of yin and yang harmony in this heavenly earth. TSK, this is a full sense of mission. Chapter 549. In the evening, Wang Lu received a letter in Gorgeous Town Inn. It was a letter from a 7-colored spirit bird, whose wings were surrounded by spirit wind. Oh, What is this? Wang Lu curiously opened the letter while looking at the bird that was standing on the window lattice and constantly combing its feathers. The bird's posture was very arrogant, and it raised its head high, seemingly looking down on everyone. After opening the letter, Wang Lu found that the letter was actually sent by the host of the Temple of Heaven in Gorgeous Town. The letter was not long. The gist of it was that the arrival of the distinguished guests was not timely greeted, which was a lack of etiquette. In the evening, a banquet was set up in the Temple of Heaven to respectfully await your arrival. Of course, according to Wang Lu's understanding, the translation of this letter was, "Two outsiders, please report to me here." The Temple of Heaven was indeed worthy to be the hegemon of the heavenly earth. Although in theory, it was only a religious organization that served the heaven, in fact, the tentacles of its power had already spread everywhere and were deeply rooted. Now, even the appearance of two strange cultivators in Gorgeous Town would attract its attention. Its scope of management was really broad. However, this was not surprising. During the day, Wang Lu and Luli ostentatiously ran to the Temple of Heaven to visit, and even took back a few heaven news. During this period, they did not deliberately hide their tracks. And if the Temple of Heaven could not even find this kind of foreign cultivator who walked into its own house, it would not be qualified to dominate the heavenly earth. It was just that, Wang Lu did not expect the other party to be so straightforward. In the evening, the invitation letter was delivered to his door. So, should he keep the appointment or not? When he was thinking about it, he saw that the seven-colored spirit bird was impatiently knocking on the window lattice with its claws, making a gurgling sound, as if it was urging him. Wang Lu impatiently waved his hand. "I have received the letter, you can go now." The spirit bird suddenly widened its eyes and incredulously stared at Wang Lu, as if it was a young girl who had been molested by a perverted man. "Hey, what are you looking at me for? Do you want me to pay for the postage? TSK, the dignified Temple of Heaven is too tasteless, sending a letter and paying for it." As Wang Lu spoke, he picked up a peanut from the plate on the table and threw it over. "Hey, eat it." The bird angrily flapped its wings and swept the peanuts aside. It then let out an excited cry that was crisp and pleasant to the ear. "Tisk, it's just a stupid bird. Yet it's so particular." Wang Lu threw a spirit stone instead. The bird stuck its head out and caught it with its beak. Then it spread its wings and flew away. However, before it left, it flapped its wings and tail wildly, blowing a large amount of dust and fallen leaves into the room. After sending away the proud messenger bird, Wang Lu turned his head and saw Luli curiously watching the departing back of the bird, seemingly reluctant to part. He couldn't help but laugh. "Ha ha ha, I forgot to ask you if you like to eat roasted bird." Luli was slightly resentful. "Senior brother, what do you think I am?" Then he carefully swallowed. That night, Wang Lu and Luli appeared on time in front of the Temple of Heaven. After thinking about it, Wang Lu felt that it was more interesting to keep the appointment. First, the wording of the other party's letter was respectful and polite, and it seemed that there was no evil intention. If he rudely refused, it would appear that he had a guilty conscience. Second, an opportunity to talk directly with the middle-level personnel of the Temple of Heaven was very necessary at this stage. After all, most of the information obtained through reading the Heaven News was speculation, and many specific matters could not even be guessed. However, if he could talk directly with the monks of the Temple of Heaven, he had the opportunity to get more information. At night, the Temple of Heaven was no longer open to the public, and the door was closed. When Wang Lu arrived at the entrance of the Temple of Heaven, a plain-dressed girl quietly opened the door, welcomed the two of them in, and led them all the way to the inner hall of the Temple of Heaven. The banquet in the inner hall had been prepared. There was only one person at the banquet, a beautiful woman who looked to be in her 30s. From the characteristics of her dress, it could be seen that she was Li Yan, the person in charge of the Temple of Heaven in Gorgeous Town. The woman was dressed in a gorgeous and beautiful dress, which meant that she was ranked 5th among the 9 layers of heaven in the Temple of Heaven, and belonged to the backbone of the Temple of Heaven system. The phoenix hairpin on her head was inlaid with a blue stone, which symbolized the status of the leader. After a simple greeting, Wang Lu and Luli took their respective seats. Then Wang Lu and Li Yan each put on a polite mask and chatted for a while, and then the tone of the banquet was set. Sure enough, as expected, This was a simple and ordinary meal to deepen each other's feelings. After all, no matter how overbearing the Temple of Heaven was, it would not go so far as to arrogantly offend all the cultivators in the world for no reason. Li Yan invited the two of them to come, but it was more for friendly exchange and to sit down and discuss. Since the tone of the banquet was set for friendly exchange, after a round of toasting, the topic quickly warmed up. Li Yan inadvertently asked about the origin of the two, and Wang Lu said that it was a hermit cultivator inheritance in the mountain. In any case, with how big the heavenly earth was, even the Temple of Heaven could not control the overall situation. At least, it was recorded in the heavenly news that when the lower realm invaded, many hermit cultivators in the heavenly earth generously came out to help. And Li Yan also did not delve into the hermit cultivator's origin. After skipping over the identity issue, the three of them began to discuss the issue of immortal cultivation. Wang Lu and Lu Li came from famous sects, while Li Yan was backed by the Temple of Heaven. Both of them were knowledgeable and had a deep foundation. The two sides' immortal cultivation systems were very different, but there was no lack of commonalities. For a time the discussion was very heated, and both sides felt that they had benefited a lot. Taking advantage of the heated topic, Wang Lu simply extended the topic and raised a question that he was very concerned about. Fellow Taoist Li Yan, I have observed the operation of all things in this world, and all of them contain the supreme path, but there is one thing that I can't understand. Fellow Taoist, please go ahead. I see that all the creatures in this world are divided into male and female, yin and yang, and yin and yang are in harmony to reproduce and live. For example, the animals, insects, and fish on our dinner plate are like this. But why are we human beings different? Has fellow Taoist ever thought that perhaps we human beings should also be like other creatures? Li Yan took a sip of tea, revealed a smile of understanding, and said, fellow Taoist's question seems ordinary, but it actually hits the nail on the head. Why are we human beings different? I believe more than one person has been curious about this question, and the answer is actually very simple. Because when the heaven created us, it made us the spirit of all things, the leader of all things. Therefore, we have a unique advantage that other creatures do not have. Ordinary creatures need to be divided into yin and yang, each having half to live and multiply endlessly. But we human beings can monopolize both sides of yin and yang. I think this is also one of the manifestations of human beings being superior to other creatures. As for what fellow Taoist said about being yin and yang, I believe it is just an illusion during cultivation. You see, the yin and yang in my body are in harmony, there is no imbalance. Of course, if we talk about the root attribute, I am indeed yin, but this is because we are only the descendants of human immortals, not immortals in the real sense, so there is still a little deficiency. When our cultivation realm is high enough, this deficiency will also disappear. And by then we will become truly perfect creatures. Wang Lu almost knelt down. Li Yan was indeed worthy to be the backbone of the 9 layers of heaven of the Temple of Heaven. The face of this professional swindler was really amazing. A ridiculous theory could actually be said by her in such a convincing manner. Then has fellow Taoist ever considered that some organs in our body look very suspicious? Li Yan blinked her eyes and said, suspicious organs? Fellow Taoist is referring to. Wang Lu very simply and clearly pointed between her legs. Li Yan was somewhat confused and also somewhat amused. This is the source of our happiness. Hey, is the joy of the Temple of Heaven actually this vulgar? Wang Lu had to patiently explain further, I mean a little deeper inside. The internal organs? Li Yan suddenly understood, you mean there. Indeed, I don't know what its use is. Apart from making those ordinary people who have never cultivated and can't control their qi and blood every month, it is meaningless. Wang Lu then asked, if our current state is already close to perfection, then don't you think it is unnecessary for that thing to exist? Creatures similar to human beings give birth to the next generation through there, but we don't need to do so. Instead, we are bestowed by the heaven to the next generation, then. Li Yan smiled and said, like I said, we human immortals are not real immortals, so it is excusable to leave some traces of imperfection on our body. In fact, in addition to the place you pointed out, there are still many useless things on our body such as the cecum, isn't it? I think fellow Taoist is probably too obsessed with the so-called perfection. Speaking to this point, perhaps because she was already drunk, Li Yan simply said a few more words. Actually, I am very clear about what fellow Taoist wants to say. Over the years, there have been many people who have raised similar questions to you, including me. I have also thought that there should be a kind of human being in this world, similar to us but different, born masculine, but when I carefully read the ancient books of the Temple of Heaven, I gradually realized how stupid my question was. Perhaps in the chaotic era, we human beings were indeed divided into two kinds, yin and yang, but later the heaven sublimated the earth to become the heavenly earth, and our ancestors also stood out from ordinary human beings. Presumably, from that time on we gradually changed. Wang Lu had nothing to say. For a swindler who attributed all problems to the heaven, it was a waste of time to say more. At this time, Li Yan also finished talking and began to get up to see the guest off. It was just before they parted. Li Yan sent Wang Lu a letter. Fellow Taoist is very knowledgeable, and many of your ideas are deeply inspiring. You have also answered a lot of problems that have troubled me for a long time. Unfortunately, I can't answer all your questions. But the Temple of Heaven is full of talented people. Above me there are still open heaven, harmonious heaven, and so on. Presumably, they can answer your questions. However, fellow Taoist is not a member of the Temple of Heaven, so take this letter. With it, you can go to the Palace of Heaven to pay a visit to Lady Moonless Harmonious Heaven, and let her answer your questions. Wang Lu put away the letter of recommendation, earnestly thanked her, and then was sent all the way to the door by Li Yan. Actually, you don't have to thank me. Today my harvest is bigger than yours. Your understanding of immortal cultivation is an eye-opener. Come to think of it, I just received a few cultivators a few days ago. Many of their viewpoints are similar to yours. If you have the opportunity to meet them, perhaps you'll be able to get along well with them. Upon hearing this, Wang Lu was surprised. Many of their views are similar to mine. At the banquet just now, some of the statements that Wang Lu said that really inspired Li Yan were basically the differences between the cultivation system of 9 regions and the cultivation system of this immortal dream. And if those people's views were similar to Wang Lu's, it was likely that in this immortal dreamland, in addition to Wang Lu and Lu Li, there were other people. Moreover, they had already visited Li Yan first. The question was, who could it be? Chapter 550. According to Li Yan, the several cultivators who visited the Temple of Heaven a few days ago had received several tasks from her. The Temple of Heaven often issued various reward tasks to the loose cultivators. At this time, they should be in Gorgeous Town. Wang Lu was very curious about what kind of sacred being would come before him. Before this, he had always thought that this immortal dream was closed, which meant that once a group of people entered, it would be closed to the outside world. Unexpectedly, it was actually open, similar to the 5 Blood Spirit Crown competition. Wang Lu was not worried about a simple dungeon raid. His many years of martial arts achievements were enough to rely on. However, once there were outsiders involved, the problem would often become complicated. Wang Lu was not worried that he would be hindered by others. The problem was that when he raided the dungeon, although he often took an unconventional path, once he unsheathed his sword, it would be a straightforward crushing situation. Those who rashly stood in front of him were likely to be directly crushed. Wang Lu didn't want to inexplicably increase the sin of killing, so he wanted to make contact with those people before he made his move, so that they could have a tacit understanding with each other. In theory, it should not be difficult to reach a tacit understanding. Li Yan said that their cultivation base was not high, and they even took over the task of doing odd jobs. Presumably, in this dungeon raid, their goal was limited, which was different from his own. Thus, they should be able to live in harmony. According to some clues provided by Li Yan, Wang Lu soon found these several cultivators in a house in Gorgeous Town. However, when he and Lu Li landed in the courtyard with his flying sword and met those people face to face, he felt a deep sense of regret. Damn it, I was careless. I should have found out that these people's magical power fluctuations are somewhat familiar. Recently, I'm getting older and forgetful. And just as Wang Lu's expression began to distort, the several girls in the courtyard also saw him. The next moment, an astonishing scream resounded through the sky. Sister Wu. Ah, that's right, I am now blessed with an illusion technique wearing the appearance of my master. And this familiar voice, this amazing enthusiasm. Wang Lu's thoughts instantly returned to the past, which made his reaction slightly slow for a moment. However, Wang Lu only hesitated for a moment before 4 fragrant winds whistled toward him. In the blink of an eye, he was surrounded by the 4 girls. Even Lu Li, who was previously holding his hand, was pushed to the side. There was a constant chatter in his ears, and every sound brought back memories of the past. Sister Wu, we've missed you so much. Lin Wan was the most enthusiastic of them all. Yes, yes, we haven't seen each other for a long time. This was the eldest sister Tiandao Lan. You haven't contacted us for so long. You're heartless. Cherry said. Sob sob sob, we were abandoned by big sister Wu. From now on we're 4 pairs of used shoes, sob sob sob. This Yingtao had become bad after not seeing him for a while. Previously, Wang Lu had a chance encounter with the 4 sisters in the immortal dreamland of the group of immortal tombs. He took the 4 of them to pass through the instance and for the first time came into contact with the secret of time travel in the group of immortal tombs. After their separation, the 2 sides only occasionally exchanged letters. They thought that with the vastness of 9 regions, it would be very difficult for them to meet again. Unexpectedly, they met again here. While thinking about it, Wang Lu felt the 4 warm bodies very intimately sticking to him. The soft touch spread all over his body, and what was even more intense was the fiery enthusiasm from those 4 bodies. No, it was not just fiery, it was simply explosive. In order to compensate us, Sister Wu, let's do double cultivation now. We've just made the bed. A luxurious 5-spirit crystal stone bed that can accommodate up to 10 people. Yes, 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 let's do double cultivation now. We really miss Sister Wu's telepathic finger. Come on, this time we will definitely not faint so quickly. Rest assured, Sister Wu. At the same time, with such explosive speech, the 4 yin and yang schoolgirls moved very quickly. Tiandao Lan waved her hand to spread out a perception concealment spell that covered the courtyard. At the same time, together with the other 3, they began to take off their clothes. The yin and yang school's uniform was carefully designed, and it was also famous in the entire 9 regions Wanxian League. In addition to the most basic function of body protection, stabilizing flow, and other effects, the biggest feature was, no matter how gorgeous and exquisite it looked, when taking it off, it could be easily taken off as long as it was gently pulled by the mechanism. Therefore, in an instant, Wang Lu felt that the touch on his body was a bit different. At the same time, those 4 pairs of claws boldly reached out to him. Sister Wu, the last time we were together you teased us, but this time we want to take our revenge. That's right, that's right. You even told us that you have a little fresh meat disciple that we can manipulate, but he seems to be easy to talk to, and he's very strict in guarding his chastity. There's no flaw at all. Your compensation doesn't work at all. Yes, this time we must take our revenge. Hehe, this time we also practice the telepathic finger. Sister Wu, you can enjoy it with ease. Seeing that the situation was about to enter an irreversible situation, Wang Lu roared, "Wait for me." At the same time, his non-phase sword chi propped up a layer of protection, pushing the 4 people away, barely maintaining the line of defense. Sister Wu, you're being shameless again. How could you use your non-phase sword defense at this time? Yes. Didn't we agree that we're only allowed to use dual cultivation to decide the outcome? If you want to protect yourself, you have to beat the opponent 1 step ahead. If you can make the 4 of us unconscious like last time, we'll be completely convinced. But this time it's not that easy. We haven't seen each other for a few years, and we've been cultivating hard. So, come on, Sister Wu, let's decide the outcome again. Wang Lu felt that cold sweat was about to flow out. Decide the outcome your ass. Although he had never been afraid of any challenge since his debut, in this fight, he really had no choice but to be afraid. Especially when he saw the 4 girls had already stretched out their dexterous and slender fingers. Wang Lu felt a burst of pain in his balls. Is this the telepathic finger? Honorable Master, how much sin have you committed in those days? Wait a minute, I want to say you've got the wrong person. Wang Lu said. Seeing that Tiandao Lan's concealing technique was not bad, he simply lifted his illusion. Look, it's me. Tiandao Lan and the other 3 girls were dumbfounded. It's you. Seeing that the 4 of them had stopped, Wang Lu was slightly relieved, nodded with a smile and said, because of some special reasons, I'm wearing my master's face. But I'm the real Wang Lu, not your Sister Wu with telepathic finger. Just now, you also felt my non-phase sword defense, which is very different from my master's. In order to avoid being regarded as Wang Wu's fake excuse, Wang Lu also added a few words of explanation. However, Tiandao Lan and the others simply didn't pay attention to it. It's Wang Lu. We missed you so much. I haven't seen you for a long time, but you're still as handsome. No, I can't help but want to dual cultivate with you. Wang Lu was inexplicably surprised. Hey, can you guys figure out who you are? I'm a serious person. I don't have any telepathic finger to serve you. Tiandao Lan said with a charming smile. You don't have it, but we do. Lin Wan was eager to give it a try. Moreover, who said you don't have it? Aren't you men born with telepathic finger? Hey, I'm not happy to be called a finger by you. And just at this time suddenly, the youngest Li Qingxi asked in surprise, men? Aren't women the only ones who can come in here? Tiandao Lan and the others were also stunned. Yes, this is a women's immortal dream. Wang Lu, how did you come in? Ying Tao suddenly had an idea. Turns out Wang Lu, you're also a woman. Is your sister? Haha, that's even better. Since we're all women, let's be honest with each other. Aren't the trigger conditions for you to be honest with each other too broad? Is the only function of your exquisite dress to be taken off? If they have wisdom, they would definitely cry, right? We will carefully teach you telepathic finger. Damn it, it's just a mere telepathic finger. Yet you still want to talk about it endlessly? Believe it or not, I'll use my big excavator to dig you until you cry for your parents. However, seeing that the several people of Yin and Yang school have entered a fanatical state, perhaps common sense wouldn't work. Thus, Wang Lu had to resort to his killer move. Luli, come here. Oh. Luli, who has been foolishly watching the show from the side, came closer. However, just as she arrived at Wang Lu's side, she was hugged by Wang Lu. I'm sorry, I have a girlfriend now. What? The four women exclaimed in unison, and then incredulously looked at the equally surprised Luli. As she's your girlfriend? No, you actually have a girlfriend? Wang Lu was immediately unhappy. Don't tell me I have a boyfriend? As soon as his voice fell, he saw Ying Tao slightly tilted her head and said, I heard that you and Hai Yun fan of 10,000 Arts sect. What the hell, where did this gossip come from? It's Sister Wu who told us. She also said that she earned a lot of money by writing doujinshi about the two of you. Your uncle's Wang Wu. In short, Wang Lu took a deep breath and suppressed his anger. I'm a normal and loyal man. I won't do anything that would let down my girlfriend. Lin Wan pursed her lips and somewhat discontentedly said, What's so good about her? Although her talent and cultivation base are indeed higher than us, and her face is also beautiful, she doesn't seem to understand the matters between men and women, so it's impossible for her to serve you well. Tiandao Lan also said, Yes, the most important thing for a woman is her inner charm. Oh no, it's her inner charm. Luli curiously asked, Senior brother, what is inner charm? Wang Lu patted her head. Don't think too much, it's not something that your IQ should consider. Oh. Then Wang Lu sighed and explained to Tiandao Lan and the others, yes, with her temperament, even in 100 years, it's impossible for her skill to be on par with you. But, with that, he stretched out his finger and untied a button on Luli's chest. She has breasts. Chapter 551. When Luli's flawless deep ravine appeared in front of them, the girls of Yin and Yang school knew that they were defeated. In terms of size alone, Luli's chest didn't seem particularly exaggerated. In 9 regions, the value of D cup couldn't even be counted as 1 in 1,000, and it was even worse than those demons. However, as the saying goes, the amateurs watch the excitement, while the experts see the artistry. For the professionals of Yin and Yang school, the extraordinariness of Luli was clear at a glance. The aesthetic ability of cultivators was on a completely different level from that of ordinary people. Because most of the cultivators of foundation establishment stage could begin to transform their body. Even a 5-inch nail could transform into a 9 feet tall man, let alone a mere cosmetic breast augmentation. However, because the technology of transformation had become stronger, the corresponding aesthetic standard would also become harsher. In addition to paying more attention to details, in Shudan stage and King Pill stage and above, the beauty or ugliness of a cultivator was also measured by the degree of internal and external harmony. If there was no internal support, the simple transformation of the body was just an empty shell. And in this respect, Lu Li, who cultivated the brilliant sword heart, was almost unparalleled. Tian Daolan asked herself, even though senior sisters who specialized in beauty in Yin and Yang school had to at least reach Yuanying stage before they could reach Lu Li's current level, what Wang Lu used to show off was really an unparalleled weapon. Perhaps Lu Li's skill was as pure as a white paper, but her heart condition was too good. This was like the most expensive fish-flavored shredded pork cooked by a famous chef could be sold for less than 100 taels of silver. However, a bear paw that had just been hunted from the deep mountain, even if it was raw, would be worth more than 100 taels of silver. The quality of Tian Daolan and the others was quite good. Unfortunately, they met Lu Li. Alas, I admit defeat. Tian Daolan put on her clothes with flagging interest. The other several girls also reluctantly lowered their heads. After the scene was subdued by Lu Li's big weapon, the several of them returned to the room and could finally have a normal conversation. After a brief greeting, the several of them got to the point. Senior brother Wang Lu, how did you come in? Lin Wan impatiently asked. Isn't this group of immortal dreams limited to women? Is it because you have some special authority? Wang Lu sighed. I also want to know why. I myself am completely baffled. Then he simply explained what had happened at the entrance, but after Tian Daolan and the others heard it, they just frowned, unable to figure out what had happened. After a while, Tian Daolan suddenly remembered something. By the way, do you remember that Changdi? She can be considered to have entered this group of immortal dreams as a non-woman. Cherry and the others were enlightened. That's right, Changdi too. Wang Lu was curious. Changdi, Tian Daolan explained, and she is also a disciple of my Yin and Yang school, just that she comes from a branch family. Although her heart is a woman, her body is that of a man. Didn't they say that a man with a woman's heart doesn't count? But Changdi used to be a genuine woman. It was just that when she was cultivating yin-yang reversal, she accidentally went berserk, so she turned into a man's body. In the end, the group of immortal dreams still recognized her as a woman. Later, the elders analyzed that perhaps as long as you were once a woman, a 100% natural woman, even if you are no longer one, it can still count. So, senior brother Wang Lu, could it be that you are in a similar situation but you don't remember it? Absolutely not. Wang Lu was resolute. What a joke, from the time he was born until now, he could remember everything, and it definitely didn't include the memory of his gender being reversed. From the time he was born, he was a genuine man, there was no mistake. From the time I was born? That's strange. Just when should I start counting my life? Theoretically, Ouyang Shang's time should also be a part of my life, right? Including the time when my soul drifted to the 3,000 worlds, it should also be counted as a part of my life. Could it be that there was something wrong with it? But Ouyang Shang was a genuine man, there was no mistake about this. Could it be that during the time when my soul crossed over, speaking of which, this was indeed an unsolved case because Wang Lu didn't completely grasp his past memories. Regarding the time when he drifted through the 3,000 worlds, he only retained a lot of fragments, but it didn't include the part where he knew himself. In other words, Wang Lu couldn't judge what kind of person he existed as during that period of time. Therefore, the possibility that he was once a woman couldn't be ruled out. And when he thought of the time when he crossed over and became a woman, Wang Lu felt that there was nothing more **head up than this in the world. No, there's definitely something wrong with this deduction. There must be some other reason why I could enter this group of immortal dreams. Hey, let's change the topic. Wang Lu let out a long sigh and then casually asked, is there any appraisal result on the heavenly silk headscarf? A few years ago, when he experienced the time travel scene in the immortal dreamland for the first time, that heavenly silk headscarf became the key evidence to prove whether time travel really existed. Unfortunately, after a few years, Yin and Yang school still couldn't come up with a reliable answer. Even today, whether time travel existed or not was still an unsolved mystery of the group of immortal tombs. However, many people had already forgotten about that heavenly silk headscarf. When it came to the heavenly silk headscarf, Tian Daolan looked embarrassed. In recent years there have been some results from the divination, but there are many contradictions between them. The elders have spent a lot of effort to deal with them, but the result is still very vague. Wang Lu said, "What if we exclude all the artificial subjective assumptions and only look at the result of the divination?" Tian Daolan said, "That heavenly silk headscarf is indeed one of the parts of the set of feather clothes." Wang Lu nodded his head. "Go on. However, it doesn't seem to be the part that we lost because the karma related to Yin and Yang school on this headscarf is too thin. It's like it has just been made and hasn't been used yet. But in theory it should have been used for a long time before it was lost. Do you have any clear evidence to prove this? That heavenly silk headscarf was indeed used by Yin and Yang school before it was lost? This is very difficult. That part of history happened a long time ago, so the written records are already very vague. But it should have been used. It's hard to make a set of magical equipment, but it didn't use it. It doesn't make sense." Wang Lu closed his eyes and thought for a while, and then opened them and said, "Do you think it's possible that when your feather clothes were just made, one of them had already been lost? It's just that, at that time your ancestors made a counterfeit or similar method to cover it up. At the same time, the original one was received into the group of immortal tombs, and then distributed to the later generations of Yin and Yang school in the form of a prize." Upon hearing this, Tian Daolan was startled. If we don't consider so many of your assumptions, it seems to make sense. After all, the historical records before the Age of Chaos are too vague, so you can say whatever you want. But the question is, why did our sect's most valuable treasure fall into the group of immortal tombs? Yes, why? Wang Lu asked with a smile. In his heart, he already had a vague guess, but he no longer said it. "How's your progress in this pass?" Tian Daolan immediately complained. "How could there be any progress? Aren't we just doing odd jobs for other people? It's just some trivial tasks. The reward is not much, but the effort spent is actually not little." Wang Lu asked, "Then why did you guys buy a house here? Do you plan to stay in Gorgeous Town for a long time and do odd jobs for Li Yin every day?" Tian Daolan said, "We have no other choice. In this heavenly earth, we are unregistered residents. According to the rules here, unless it's Taoist Master King Pill, otherwise, being an unregistered resident would be very inconvenient. That Li Yin is actually very easy to talk to. She wants us to do some odd jobs for her here, and in return she will help us with our identity." Alas, senior brother Wang Lu, if you are also doing a task in Gorgeous Town, you must help us. Wang Lu apologetically smiled. "I'm sorry, I'm going to leave Gorgeous Town soon. A King Pill level city is a bit inefficient for me. But before I leave, I can help you talk to Li Yin and see if she can solve your household registration problem as soon as possible." "Senior brother Wang Lu, you're really the best." Lin Wan was pleasantly surprised and threw herself at him. It's just that in the blink of an eye, a few pieces of her clothes were gone, revealing a large area of her snow-white skin. Wang Lu took a step back and calmly dodged. Tian Daolan softly said, "After this farewell, we don't know when we can meet again. Don't you want to leave some memories? It's not good to have sex with each other after we part. But we'll miss you." Li Qingxi softly said. "Yeah, you too, Sister Wu too. After we part, we won't be able to see each other again. Even our letters are getting fewer and fewer. We are actually very sad." Seeing that these girls were actually on the verge of crying while talking, Wang Lu was too lazy to care whether they were acting or serious. He hurriedly took out another big killer weapon. "Since you just want to leave some memories to relieve your loneliness, then use this." He reached into his mustard seed bag and took out a thick stack of video crystal stones. Among them, the images of his master Wang Wu's naked body could be found everywhere. "These are for you. I wish you a happy practice of telepathic finger." After bidding farewell to the several junior sisters of Yin and Yang school, Wang Lu went to the Temple of Heaven again. Li Yin was really easy to talk to, and soon agreed to solve the identity problem for Tian Daolan and the others. Then Wang Lu directly left Chongqing City and rode his sword toward the Palace of Heaven. The Palace of Heaven was the largest city within thousands of miles, and was also one of the important strongholds of the Temple of Heaven for many years. The one who controlled the Temple of Heaven was Moonless Harmonious Sky, who was ranked 7th among the 9 heavens of the Temple of Heaven. He had entered the high-level sequence and was an out-and-out overlord. According to the information obtained from the conversation with Li Yin at the table, Moonless Harmonious Sky was likely to be a deity stage expert. For someone who had just stabilized his cultivation in the middle grade of King Pill, his level was a bit too high. But wasn't it interesting if his level was particularly high? Chapter 552. This is the Palace of Heaven. Worthy of being harmonious heaven city, it already has the imposing manner of a demon king's fortress. Standing outside the Palace of Heaven, Wang Lu sincerely sighed with emotion at the Palace of Heaven, which was one of the top 10 cities on heavenly earth. The Palace of Heaven was extremely large. From the periphery of the city to the center of the city, the radiation radius was at least more than 100 miles, and the population was in the tens of millions. It was one of the largest cities in the vicinity. However, the core of the Palace of Heaven was a floating castle with a radius of no more than 3 miles. The castle was built in the sky above the center of the city, and it was called Moon Capital. Every time night fell, Moon Capital would gather the moonlight in the entire Palace of Heaven, so that the city could no longer see the slightest bit of moonlight, and this was because of the personal preference of the master of the Temple of Heaven, Moonless Harmonious Heaven. Her name was Moonless, so she did not want her subordinates to see the moon at night. Her logic was crude and simple, and it also made Wang Lu have a pessimistic expectation for this meeting before the meeting. After staying in the heavenly earth for a period of time, he had a more detailed understanding of this place. In his view, this Temple of Heaven was undoubtedly the unquestionable overlord of this place, but due to various considerations, it did not make this overlord status obvious. For example, every city in the heavenly earth had a corresponding city lord as the person in charge, and the person in charge was usually not the same as the master of the local temple. For example, the palace lord of the Palace of Heaven was not moonless. However, here came the problem. A city had both a city lord and a temple of heaven, so who had the final say in the end? The answer was the Temple of Heaven. Although the nominal ruler of the city was the city lord, the Temple of Heaven had the right to control the city lord, and when necessary, it could participate in the major matters of the city management. And what supported this strange ruling structure was the absolute force of the Temple of Heaven. The Palace Lord of the Palace of Heaven was a Yuanying stage master, but Moonless Harmonious Heaven was a Taoist master of deity stage. How could it be easy to make the Palace Lord speak louder than Moonless? Of course, the heavenly earth was vast and had a large population. There were always special cases. For example, Li Yan of Gorgeous Town did not like to participate in the mundane affairs. The management of the city was completely thrown to the city lord. She was alone in the Temple of Heaven. In fact, this should be the original intention of the Temple of Heaven. The clergy only needed to serve the heaven and manage their own cultivation. But this truth obviously did not work in the Palace of Heaven. The moon capital that blotted out the sky had fully reflected the absolute strength of the Temple of Heaven here. It must be known that just below Moon Capital was the residence of the Palace Master of the Palace of Heaven. Not to mention that the moonlight could not be seen at night, even the sunlight during the day was blocked. It was the same as being trampled underfoot. Moonless style of doing things was also evident. Dealing with such a person was indeed an art, so Wang Lu had done his homework in advance. Not only did he take a detour to Tsangtian City, he also prepared a few gifts. Hopefully, these preparations would allow him to get what he wanted. This Moonless Harmonious Heaven was once a fierce general who fought in the front line of the invasion of the lower realm. She had personally beheaded no less than hundreds of chaotic world generals. In a time of crisis, she did not hesitate to risk her life and sacrificed half of her body to permanently smash a passage to the lower realm. Thus, she was promoted by the Temple of Heaven as an exception, and became the real master of the Palace of Heaven. Moreover, she lived here for a long time like a vassal king. No matter how overbearing such a person was in other aspects, at least when it came to the chaotic world and the topic of war, she was undoubtedly an expert. And Wang Lu happened to have a lot of questions about the chaotic world that he wanted to ask. Last time at Li Yan's banquet, Wang Lu had too many thoughts and doubts. After entering the city with Li Yan's letter of introduction, Wang Lu and Lu Li were quickly led into Moon Capital by the guards, but Moonless did not immediately meet them. The guards led them into a lounge, where there were already no less than 100 people waiting. The spacious lounge seemed to be crowded. Wang Lu and Lu Li couldn't even find a place to sit. Moon capital is indeed worthy. Wang Lu softly sighed with emotion. The people waiting here were all guests who came to visit Moonless, either for official or private affairs. Most of these people's cultivation base was not low. There were more than 20 people who were at King Pill level, and even 2 of them were at Yuaning stage. Although they were just rookie Yuaning stage cultivators who had just crossed the threshold, they were still Yuaning stage cultivators. Right now, they were still arranged to be crowded in this narrow lounge, which showed how busy Moon Capital was. Before entering Moon Capital, Wang Lu had sensed with his primordial spirit that the main residence of the Palace of Heaven below Moon Capital was sparsely populated. Are you also here to visit Lady Moonless? As soon as Wang Lu and Luli stood still, they heard someone talking next to them. Wang Lu nodded his head. Where are you from? I am Hua Qingshan, a wandering nun from the Temple of God of Shiyun Mountain. Wang Lu turned his head and saw a girl with a bright smile but even more brightly dressed. She was wearing a coarse short shirt and a pair of fluffy trousers. There were several patches on her clothes, densely packed together like mosaics. She was dressed like a commoner who couldn't be more impoverished, but every patch on her body was shining brightly. They were all expensive fabrics woven from the 5-star spirit threads. This kind of gorgeous patch dress was really rare. Even in the fashion capital of 9 regions, such a design was rare. Wang Lu was curious and could not help but be lost in thought. Hua Qingshan giggled and said, "Does it look good? I designed it. This time, I came to visit Lady Moonless in the hope that she would approve me to promote this set of clothes in the vicinity." Wang Lu could not help but ask, "Why do you want to promote this?" "Because the original design is not attractive." Hua Qingshan sighed helplessly and took out another set of clothes. It was also a coarse blouse full of patches which looked very shabby. According to the original regulations of the Temple of Heaven, we wandering monks are responsible for walking in the secular world, soliciting alms and preaching. During this period our standard uniform is like this. The original intention is to let the wandering monks reflect the noble character and unquestionable integrity of the Temple of Heaven in the process of wandering, so that more people have confidence in us. But now, when people see you in such a shabby dress, they avoid you like the plague. In some places, the wandering monks are even more excessive. They don't even pay attention to personal hygiene. The reputation of the Temple of Heaven is ruined. Wang Lu inwardly thought, you wandering monks who are supposed to be poor, actually have a bad reputation by wearing gold and silver. However, when he thought of this moon capital that blotted out the sky, what could a mere gold patch do to you? In fact, the people below have reported to the higher-ups many times, hoping to change the past rules, but the higher-ups have always refused, saying that this violates the fundamental purpose of the Temple of Heaven. Alas, so we have to find ways to reform and innovate by ourselves. Here, this is the result of my innovation. Hua Qingshan proudly stuck out her chest. Although it is different from the standard illustration, it does not violate the written regulations at all. Anyway, the Book of Rites of the Heaven only stipulates the material of the clothes, but it does not specify in detail what kind of material to use for the patches. I believe that if it can be tested in the Palace of Heaven, it will be very popular. Good luck. Hua Qingshan smiled. Speaking of which, I still have a few sets here to test. Do you need them? I can see that your cultivation base and temperament are not bad, so you should also be the person in charge of a temple, right? With that, Hua Qingshan simply began to promote her own products. Wang Lu politely declined. However, after this dialogue, Wang Lu increasingly felt that this Temple of Heaven seemed to be very similar to some organization in his impression. Of course, this was not a problem. Anyway, he was not a local resident, so it was not worthwhile to care about other people's political structure. The problem was that he came here to seek knowledge, but at present, among the people who visited Moonless, there were only a few people who sought knowledge, and most of them were for policy. It was not a good thing for him to mix with this group of people. Moreover, as a highly politicized master of the Temple of Heaven, he was afraid that he had long lost interest in seeking knowledge and so on. Li Yin didn't know how many years ago she became friends with Moonless. She thought that Moonless was a cultivator who yearned for the immortal path in the past, but she didn't expect the world to change. Thinking of this, Wang Lu even considered giving up this route. Anyway, this world was very big. And there might not be only Li Yan, moonless. However, at this moment, the door of the lounge was suddenly opened. A girl in a luxurious white dress with an indifferent face pushed the door and looked at Wang Lu. Lady Moonless has summoned you. Us. Wang Lu was quite surprised. The others were equally shocked. This girl actually jumped the queue. Moreover, she was personally appointed by Lady Moonless to jump the queue. What was the relationship between them and Lady Moonless? It must be known that there were two Taoist masters of Yuanying stage who were still waiting patiently. In theory, it would be their turn after 3 days, but the latest waiting time was at least a week. Why did she do that? Unfortunately, the maid in white had already frowned impatiently. Hurry up, Lady Moonless, time is very precious. Under the guidance of the waiter, Wang Lu left the lounge and went deep into the core of Moon Capital. However, not long after following the maid, Wang Lu felt that something was wrong, because they had already passed the reception room, but the maid continued to move forward. Hey, aren't we supposed to meet in the reception room? The maid in white turned around and glared at Wang Lu. Shut up and follow me obediently. Wang Lu couldn't help but sigh. What a fierce domestic dog. You. The blue veins on the forehead of the maid in white were bulging, and her murderous aura was slightly exposed. Wang Lu was not polite and looked down at her condescendingly. Tisk tsk, 1 black, 2 yellow, 3 flowers and 4 white. It's understandable that the lowest class of things doesn't know etiquette. The maid in white glared at Wang Lu for a long time, but finally swallowed hard and forcibly suppressed her anger. Be careful with your words and actions. This is the residence of Lady Harmonious Heaven. No one is allowed to speak at will without permission. Then she walked forward quickly and led the way in front. After a while, they had entered the range of Moonless residence in Moon Capital. So Wang Lu realized that the place chosen by Moonless to meet the guest was her bedroom. It seemed that Li Yan and she really had a deep friendship. With just a letter of introduction, she could let Moonless have a private meeting with someone. Not long after, the maid in white brought Wang Lu to the door of the bedroom. At the door, 2 maids in black opened the door. So Wang Lu finally saw the long-known Lady Moonless Harmonious Heaven. A living dead with half of her body turned into bones. Chapter 553. In the bedroom, a woman with half a human face and half a skeleton was sitting cross-legged on the couch. Moonless Harmonious Sky. Ranked 7th in the 9 heaven ranks set by the Temple of Heaven. She was a powerhouse with great prestige in the entire heavenly earth, and the actual ruler of tens of millions of people in the Palace of Heaven. In Wang Lu's expectation, she should be a heroic overlord. However, what he saw in front of him formed a very sharp contrast with his expectation. The legends about Moonless mentioned that she suffered injuries in the war with the chaotic world and never healed them in her life. He thought that they were just some eye-catching scars, which could be used as a medal to show off her martial arts, but unexpectedly, this Moonless was really thorough in doing things. The so-called sacrifice of half of her body was actually literal. The right half of Moonless' body was intact, but the left half was a skeleton. Part of her body was covered by her dress, but her head was exposed. Moonless' intact right eye was tightly closed, but the left eye socket of the skull was shining with a red light. The situation was extremely frightening. This honor alone was completely unexpected. For Wang Lu, all unexpected situations were bad news. The other party was a battle-hardened Taoist master of deity stage. In theory, his illusion technique could be seen at a glance. Even if she was essentially just a creation of the immortal dreamland and was not as good as a genuine deity stage master, she was still a deity stage master. Before he came here, he had combined some rare materials left in his mustard seed bag, plus the props that he bought at a high price in Sky City to greatly strengthen his illusion technique. However, it was still unknown whether he could hide it from the eyes of a Taoist master of deity stage. Without Li Yan's letter, Wang Lu would not have rashly come here. However, everything was basically based on a precise plan. If there was an unexpected situation, it would test his ability to adapt to the situation. Of course, this ability was also available to Wang Lu, so he calmly entered the room and greeted them with a smile. And what greeted him was the hearty laughter of Moonless. You are the 2 little guys that Li Yan introduced? Haha, come and sit down. Such a kind gesture was even more unexpected. Wang Lu even wondered if there was a publicity commissioner of her Temple of Heaven in this bedroom. As long as they recorded the conversation in the bedroom, they could publish a report tomorrow with the title, Lord Harmonious Heaven Meets the Grassroots People. This would show how approachable Lord Harmonious Heaven is. However, it was clear that no one else was waiting in Moonless' bedroom. Even the black-clothed maid, who had the highest position in the black and yellow sequence, could only wait outside the door. It was clear that this was a very private meeting. Don't stand on ceremony. After Wang Lu and Luli sat down on the praying mat, Moonless said, Li Yan and I have been through life and death together. Although I haven't seen her for decades, I always remember her kindness. She said in the letter that the two of you are her new friends. Li Yan does not make friends easily. Since you can get her approval, it is equivalent to getting my approval. I treat you guys as friends so you don't have to be so reserved. Please keep the gifts, I don't need them. After saying that, Moonless slightly restrained his smile. Li Yan said in the letter that you two have questions about cultivation that you want to ask me? Yes, in recent years, there are fewer and fewer people who have the heart and sincerity to cultivate immortality, and more people are obsessed with fame and fortune. Hearing this, Wang Lu just wanted to laugh, thinking, you, a standard bureaucrat politician, have the nerve to criticize others? Moonless seemed to have seen through Wang Lu's thoughts and slowly replied, to deal with worldly affairs, I only use the left side of the dead body. Wang Lu froze for a moment, and then said with a smile, very well, then I won't be polite. First of all, I want to ask, do you want to comprehend the immortal path through the convergence of life and death? Upon hearing this, Moonless opened his right eye. No wonder Li Yan spoke so highly of you in the letter. Those mediocre people only think that I'm showing off my scars, but they never thought that with my current status, who else do I need to show off? You're right, I do use life and death to approach the immortal path. With that, Moonless suddenly laughed. Apart from that, what else can you see? Life and death, yin and yang, black and white. All the contradictory and unified concepts should be reflected in you. Your left and right halves are entrusted with quite a lot of things. It should be said that you're trying to use this method to make up for your congenital defects. Hearing this, Moonless burst into laughter. Aha, well said. No wonder a talent like you would wander outside the Temple of Heaven system. That old-fashioned theology can't satisfy you. Wang Lu said, no wonder you and Li Yan, who are friends of life and death, haven't seen each other for decades. Compared to that lazy but devout Li Yan, you should be tied to the stake. But from another point of view, if not, you would not be qualified to control the Palace of Heaven, a big city. For an organization in charge of the regime, idealists are not qualified to rise to a high position. After receiving Moonless' encouragement, Wang Lu simply bluntly said, we are not perfect creatures. I think all things in this world are divided into yin and yang, only we have no gender. When I asked Li Yan, she only said that it was the will of the heaven, but I don't think so. So, I want to ask Master Moonless, what is your opinion? The will of the heaven. Unexpectedly, after not seeing her for decades, Li Yan has learned to deceive herself. Moonless suddenly sneered, how does a human middle immortal come to be? Other people don't know, but how could she not know? She just doesn't want to admit it. With that, Moonless closed his right eye and said in a deep voice, you guessed it right, human beings do have a gender distinction, and we are the yin side. In theory, there should be a yin side corresponding to us. Wang Lu nodded and said, sure enough. But why does the Temple of Heaven deliberately conceal this news? This is not good for the development of heavenly earth, right? Obviously imperfect, but they think they are perfect. Obviously, they have a naturline physique, but they think they have both yin and yang. This cognitive deviation is a great obstacle to cultivation. You want to know? Moonless asked with interest, are you sure you want to know the answer? For you, since you have guessed the yin and yang division, you will no longer be affected by the cognitive barrier, so why bother to explore the secret behind it? Curiosity is the driving force of progress. Well said. That being the case, I will let you have a look. With that, Moonless stood up and clapped his hands. Wang Lu only saw a slender and soft palm touch a pale bone claw twice, and then the bedroom door was pushed open by the maid in black. I want to take the guests to see my collection. You lead the way. Moonless Collection was built in the underground part of Moon Capital. The group of people, led by the maid in black, walked slowly in the deep corridor. Along the way there were countless kinds of traps. The maid in black who led the way used more than 30 kinds of props as keys to avoid them one by one, and finally led the 3 people to the entrance of the collection. Normally, no matter how precious the treasure was, it would not be so heavily guarded. Moreover, the really important things were generally carried by the cultivators. Therefore, seeing the lineup at the entrance, Wang Lu faintly felt that what he would see next would not be anything good. Sure enough, after opening the door of the collection, the maid who led the way hurriedly retreated, as if she had a deep fear of the things in the collection. Moonless stepped in generously. Behind the door was a spacious and deep hall. As Moonless entered, it suddenly became brightly lit, so that people could see the collection in the collection. The moment his vision became clear, Wang Lu could not help but close his eyes. This was truly an unexpected sight. How do you feel? Moonless' voice came from the front. These are the trophies I collected in the war 45 years ago. Any one of them is an outstanding master in the chaotic world. This is the real military merit worth showing off. The scars on my body are only a shame. What's there to show off? Wang Lu nodded silently. With the light around the collection, he could clearly see dozens of crystal troughs in the hall, and the corpses of chaotic creatures lying quietly in them. Each of those chaotic creatures looked ferocious and had their own characteristics. Some had fangs turned outward, some had an eye in the middle of their forehead, but the basic outline was very clear. They were humanoid and they were full of muscles and broad bones. They were very standard male. I guess this is the answer you want. Why does the Temple of Heaven want to hide the division between yin and yang? Because we can't tell the world that your other half is a chaotic creature. So that's how it is. This is indeed a secret that can't be made public. While carefully observing the corpses in the collection, Wang Lu asked, generally speaking, creatures need to mate with yin and yang to reproduce. We have the heaven to give us new life, but what about the chaotic world? They are only males, how do they reproduce? I see that the corpses of these chaotic creatures, in addition to the basic outline, often have the characteristics of other animals, such as ox horns, sheep hooves, horsetails, and so on. Could it be? Moonless coldly snorted and said, when the need to reproduce overwhelms everything, they will naturally look for all possible mothers. Humph, dirty lower realm scum. Wang Lu looked for a while and then asked, strange, these chaotic creatures are only male? Can't they give birth to females? I don't know. For thousands of years we have never really set foot on the land of the lower realm. Every time we come, we kill all the invaders. The filthy land of the lower realm is fatal to us. Wang Lu nodded his head to show that he understood. At the same time, he realized that this immortal dreamland might also be hiding an extremely huge and difficult subplot to help the chaotic creatures of the lower realm overthrow the heavenly earth and bring the yin and yang back to normal. However, this idea was not convenient to say. He could only think about it in his heart. Just as he was thinking about it, he suddenly heard Moonless said, Li Yan's evaluation of you in the letter is very high, and seeing you today, you really did not let me down. Wang Lu cupped his hands and said, you flatter me. I like you too very much, so you can stay in Moon Capital. Ah. I haven't expanded the harem of Moon Capital for more than 10 years. Today I will make an exception for you too. Wait a minute. Chapter 554. Alas, I should have thought that there's no such thing as a free lunch in this world, let alone in the immortal dreamland that follows the basic principle of equivalent exchange. This Moonless enthusiasm has obviously exceeded the necessary limit. I thought she would assign us some more difficult tasks, and we can also take this opportunity to hone our actual combat experience. Unexpectedly, she actually took drastic measures. In a beautifully decorated bedroom, Wang Lu helplessly shrugged his shoulders. Before visiting Moonless, Wang Lu never thought that the plot would escalate to this point. Before he could get any information from Moonless, he was forcibly detained by the other party as a member of the harem. Not long ago, when Moonless domineeringly proposed to take Wang Lu and Luli into the harem, Wang Lu thought that she was joking. Her original intention was to keep the two of them for dinner. After all, for a person who only had one breast left to have such an interest, she was definitely a perverted traitor. But soon Moonless laughed and left. Then, the black-clad maids solemnly prepared the bedroom and related necessities for the two of them in Moon Capital. They also specially wrote a warm reminder, stating several issues that needed to be paid attention to when getting along with Lady Moonless, including the bedtime schedule, skill requirements, and so on. It dazzled and made people deeply admire her. Then Wang Lu realized that Moonless was serious. Moonless was indeed a high-level bureaucrat of the Temple of Heaven. Things that seemed licentious and tyrannical to others were taken for granted by her. It made people have to sigh with emotion that this was the role model of a bureaucrat. No matter when, she always maintained a strong possessive desire, which was in sharp contrast to Aya, that good-for-nothing. After sighing with emotion, it was time to think about countermeasures. The harem was not suitable to stay for a long time. Although the harem route was undoubtedly a shortcut to get magical treasures and methods, but with Wang Lu's identity and vision, how could he want to be a *** for others? Not to mention that Moonless was just a deity stage. Even if she was a true immortal descending to the mortal world, Wang Lu would still consider how to find an opportunity to kill her and then pick up the loot. However, even if he wanted to escape, he had to find the right time. Although he looked down on the collection of a deity stage, he had to admit that he was still far from being able to confront a deity stage head-on. If he angered Moonless, he might not even be able to escape. Therefore, just now, when Moonless domineeringly took him and Luli into the harem, Wang Lu didn't confront it head-on. Instead, he agreed for the time being and slowly plotted. With the remaining props in the mustard seed bag, as long as he figured out the structure of Moon Capital's formation, he was sure that he could find a flaw and escape when Moonless was not paying attention. Now all he had to do was wait for the right time. While thinking about it, Wang Lu flipped through the warm tips provided by the black-clothed maid, trying to find any flaws in Moonless that he could exploit. However, when he flipped to the end, he could not help but be shocked. What is this? Harem list. Looking at the pages filled with names, Wang Lu was shocked. When he flipped them over, it was another full page. Adding the two pages together, the number of people in the harem was over 100. No wonder it was written in the warm tips that the time to serve was about once a month. He initially thought that Moonless' demand was not that strong, but it turned out that she couldn't even get a shift. Wait a minute, there were more than 100 harem beauties, but they were arranged once a month. Does she need 3 or 4 people to accompany her every day? What kind of explosive waist strength is this? While he was sighing with emotion, the bedroom door was suddenly pushed open from the outside, and 4 or 5 female cultivators with different appearances came in. The one in the lead looked arrogant and domineering as she walked into the room. She glanced around and then focused her eyes on Wang Lu and Luli. Are you guys the newcomers? In just one sentence, Wang Lu had roughly guessed the identity of these people, his new colleagues. They were also the old drivers in the harem. Wang Lu secretly sensed them with his primordial spirit, and found that they were just a group of King Pill stage dregs. Thus, he casually cupped his hands toward them as a courtesy, but what he got in return was a sneer. The woman in the lead narrowed her slender eyes and chuckled. Previously, I heard the servants say that the 2 new sisters are not from the Temple of Heaven, so they don't know the rules very well. Originally, I blamed the servants for speaking without knowing the immensity of heaven and earth, but I didn't expect to see it with my own eyes. It's simply unbelievable. How could such barbaric and unruly people like you be qualified to serve the lady in Moon Capital? Lady Harmonious Heaven manages the Palace of Heaven, and the surrounding 3 mountains and 15 cities, so her mission and responsibility are great. If she is in a bad mood because of the 2 of you not serving her well, then you 2 will die. Therefore, I think you 2 should first learn the basic etiquette with the servants for a few months, which is also considered as big sister's consideration for you. While speaking, the several followers around the woman had come forward, grabbed the arms of Wang Lu and Luli, and were about to drag them out. This set of business process was too familiar to them. Basically, every newcomer had to go through such a process. After receiving a show of strength, only then could they honestly stay dormant in the harem. Moonless' vision was quite high. In recent years, the people who entered the harem were all talented and unruly people. Thus, it was the mission of the old drivers in the harem to break the lofty and unyielding character of these people, so that those who once had self-respect would shamelessly roll under Moonless' feet. Of course, in addition to serving Lady Moonless, they would more or less have some selfishness. After all, every new harem beauty was a direct competitor. For these female cultivators who regarded the harem as their heaven, Moonless' favor was everything. However, her favor was, after all, limited. If there was one more person, the others would inevitably get less. When the old drivers were ready to make their move, Luli looked at Wang Lu at a loss, not knowing whether she should resist or not. However, Wang Lu frowned and began to quickly sort out his thoughts. The current scene, no matter how he looked at it, was like a scene in a harem fight. Two humble but kind-hearted mistresses were pushed aside by the narrow-minded main harem. And according to the orthodox way of development, after the two of them experienced torture, they finally moved a certain valley hero in the harem with their pure and kind quality. On one hand, the hero saved their lives and on the other hand taught them the way to survive in the harem. Finally, the hero died miserably in the hands of the main harem for various reasons, and the two heroines who inherited the will of the valley hero began their long journey of revenge. Such a script was completely predictable. After all, from the point of view of the harem route alone, relying on the advantage of outsiders to get treasures from Moonless was too easy, and this was impossible to conform to the principle of equivalent exchange in the immortal dream land. Therefore, the harem route was bound to face all kinds of difficulties, and the harem fight must be one of the main lines. If this route was unfolded, it could be imagined that there would be this and that kind of tragic story. At least, Wang Lu had come up with 7 or 8 interesting routes, but he was not interested in putting them into practice. If it was before his transmigration, he might still be in the mood to play with these cold and empty women who could only be visited once a month, such as setting off a trend of raising dogs in the harem. But now he was in a hurry, so he preferred to fight rather than fight in the harem. Previously, he was worried that the road of fighting in the immortal dreamland was forcibly interrupted by Moonless into a harem fight route, but as a result, this group of people actually came to his door and forced him to change the route back. A group of people who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth came to provoke him. If he didn't make a move, it would be a waste of his hard work. With his current strength, it was unrealistic to contend with Moonless, but in Moon Capital, apart from Moonless, even if it was Moonless' strongest assistants who were in the middle level of Yuanying stage, Wang Lu was confident that he could forcibly fight them. As for the group of wastewood in the harem, it was not a problem. In his view, it was simply experience points that were delivered to his door. The only thing he needed to take into account was Moonless' own reaction. But as soon as she left, this group of B***cheese followed her in. If there was no connection, it was probably because Moonless was also observing his reaction. Then I'll give you a good show to watch. Anyway, even if Moonless herself personally came down, Wang Lu also had a unique skill to save his life. After thinking about all this, Wang Lu no longer hesitated. With a roar, a trace of primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi was condensed in his hand from the king pill, and then he punched the woman next to him. Although the other party was also a king pill cultivator, how could she be compared with Wang Lu, who was a king pill cultivator? In a blink of an eye, her nose was smashed by the fist wrapped in primal chaos sword chi. The woman on the other side was stunned, and then her jaw was broken by the same punch, and her broken teeth fell to the ground. The two were, after all, king pill level Taoist masters, but they were disfigured in just one encounter. The woman who was the leader was stunned, and her heart was surging with stormy waves. The strength of Wang Lu's cultivation was still secondary. He dared to make a move in the harem of Moon Capital. This was the problem that made her view of the world waver. Moonless' temperament was strict and almost violent. She was extremely strict with her subordinates. If there was a little mistake, even if there was a flaw in the clothes, she would be severely punished, not to mention openly violating the ban in the harem and fighting. This was simply courting death. Who the hell were these two newcomers? She thought that they were the new favorite concubines of Master Moonless. One was a middle-grade king pill, and the other was a peak shoot-on. Unexpectedly, the other party was so fearless. How dare you wantonly commit murder in Moon Capital? Don't you want to live anymore? The woman calmed her mind and asked in a stern voice. At the same time, she quietly took out a yin and yang heart protection mirror. It was a high-grade magic treasure that Moonless had given her after a sexual intercourse. Wang Lu's 2 punches just now had shattered the facial bones of the 2 king pill cultivators, and their protective chi seemed to have disappeared. She saw this and all the hair on her body stood up. However, the next moment Wang Lu punched her again, and the speed was so fast that it made her heart palpitate. She was at the peak of Jindan's stage, but in front of this punch she was as fragile as a piece of paper. The spells of the 5 elements that once made her famous were all thrown out of the sky. She could only hope that the yin-yang heart protection mirror could save her life. Bang! After a muffled sound, the woman flew out, and her body hit the wall of the corridor outside the bedroom. A mouthful of blood spurted out more than 10 feet away. Ha! Wang Lu slowly retracted his fist, and at the same time he took a long breath. The joy in his heart was indescribable. Chapter 555. The news that a riot broke out in the harem of Moon Capital shocked many people. Under the coercion of Moonless Harmonious Sky, the tens of millions of people in the entire Palace of Heaven were trembling with fear. As for Moonless Harmonious Sky, there was no need to mention the Moon Capital, where the cold and oppressive atmosphere had damaged the mental state of many cultivators who had just arrived. However, the riot did break out. The harem guards who heard the news had gathered 50 people in the time it took to drink a cup of tea, but when they arrived at the scene was already unbearable to look at. There were more than 10 harem concubines lying on the ground. Most of them were injured by iron fists. There were very clear fist marks on their faces, and then they were unconscious. There was a river of nosebleeds on the ground, and there were even a few strands of gray mucus that looked like brain juice. It was really a tragic sight. At the same time, there were 7 or 8 people shivering around the foot of the wall, including the harem concubines and maids. The murderer who caused all this was standing in the middle of the river of blood, wiping his fists with the bedsheets in the bedroom, with a satisfied look on his face. It's really refreshing. Although they are just a group of small fries, I feel that my experience value has increased by more than 2 bars. Wang Lu put down his bloodshot and hot fists and sighed with relief. A harem concubine said with a trembling voice, Do you know what you are doing? How dare you act violently in Moon Capital? You will never be reincarnated. Wang Lu glanced at her and said, I have always respected family planning. The concubine did not hear what Wang Lu said at all. When Wang Lu turned his eyes, she was so scared that she screamed, Guards, take her down. No, kill her. She has been contaminated by the chaotic creatures of the lower realm. The captain of the guards, Han Yu, sighed at that time. This group of harem beauties, they didn't have any other skills, but their ability to stir up trouble was imprinted in their bones. They were scared to the point that their skirts were wet, and they weren't clear-headed, but they were able to talk about using someone else to do their dirty work. It was truly admirable. This yelling concubine was taken into the harem by Lady Moonless 5 years ago. At that time, she was a famous wandering monk in Yuxialan. When she first entered the King Pill, she was in high spirits. Who knew that after 5 years, she had become crafty and mean, and the immortal spirit she once had was lost. And Han Yu had seen too many such people. Most of the hundreds of harem members had gone through the same path. At the beginning, Han Yu was very confused. Why did the wise and powerful Lady Moonless let her harem degenerate to this extent? But later she gradually understood. Especially when she happened to see Moonless showing an incomparably cold gaze to her own empress, Han Yu realized that perhaps this was the scene that Moonless wanted. Moonless had never really been moved by the imperial concubines in the harem. Even her possessiveness was not sincere. What she needed was a large harem to support her bureaucratic scene. But she was not interested in the management of the harem at all, so she referred to the most orthodox harem model. Let the concubines diligently fight among themselves and quarrel with each other, while Moonless herself looked on coldly as if watching a play. And over the years, the performance of the actors on the stage had become more and more outstanding. Han Yu felt that the group of people headed by the main concubine, Concubine Xiao Yun, was exactly the same as the harem concubines in novels. Unfortunately, There was one more actor on the stage today who did not perform according to the script. Looking at the nosebleed, Han Yu felt very complicated. On the one hand, she sincerely admired this person's courage, and at the same time, she couldn't help but feel happy. Most of those who were knocked unconscious on the ground were usually arrogant and disrespectful to the guards. But on the other hand, because of her duty, she couldn't let that person act violently. Han Yu didn't have the courage to directly kill the other party, because she wasn't sure whether this person should be killed or not. Not long ago, Lady Moonless had personally taken these two people into the harem. Who knew what she was thinking? So it was better to find a way to trap them first, and then let Lady Moonless deal with them. As for whether she could take them down or not, hey, if a dignified Taoist master of Yuanying stage couldn't even take down a middle-grade king pill, then she didn't need to work in Moon Capital. Thinking of this, Han Yu clenched the short cane in her hand and took a step forward. Suddenly, the whole bedroom turned upside down, and the scene had been replaced by a vast grassland. At the same time, the dark clouds were densely covering the earth, so dark that one couldn't even see their own fingers. Only the thunder from time to time brought a little light. After a while, heavy rain poured down, as if the sky was broken and the Milky Way was leaking. Bathed in this cold rainstorm, Wang Lu couldn't distinguish the authenticity of the rain. Original magical ability? It had been a long time since Wang Lu used this skill to change the sky in an instant. Because recently Wang Lu's fights were all short and quick, and the outcome was basically decided within a few moves. Whether it was him or his opponent, neither of them would resort to their original magical ability, this kind of big killer weapon. Although the power of original magical ability was strong, it was essentially a means to delay the rhythm, and the consumption was huge, so no one was willing to use it easily. Unexpectedly, this Yuanying stage cultivator, who was the captain of the guards, was so decisive that she used her original magical ability right away. Moreover, judging from the scene of the grassland rainstorm, the power of this original magical ability was quite good. Wang Lu didn't know that Han Yu actually wanted to control the situation and delay time, waiting for Lady Moonless to arrive. He was thinking, could it be that the captain of the guards could see that he had a lot of hidden cards? If so, the strength evaluation of the captain of the guards should be raised by a few levels. Powerful cultivation base was not terrible, but powerful cultivation base and shrewd and careful, that was very terrible. In this moment of hesitation, the rainstorm became heavier and heavier. Luli, who was next to him, could not help but take 2 steps closer. The girl who was still in peak shoot on stage could not withstand the pressure of a Taoist master of Yuanying stage, especially since she was good at offense and bad at defense. Before the King Pill stage was formed to protect her body, she almost had no resistance in front of a Yuanying stage cultivator. Wang Lu looked at Luli, took her into his arms, and then propped up his non-phase sword defense. In the dark rainy night, the golden sword defense was like the center of the world, dazzling. However, the person who raised the rainstorm was always hidden in the dark. With the cultivation base of Yuanying stage against a Jindan and a Shudan, he did not hesitate to use the stealth backstab method. This was no longer using a butcher's knife to kill a chicken, but rather using a holy sword to kill a chicken. Wang Lu was silent in the rainstorm for a while, and then he let out a long breath. His golden core operated, and the original magical ability that was hidden in the deepest part of the golden core was launched. The King Pill level original magical ability could not directly contend against Yuanying stage cultivator. Therefore, the red light in the sky above the grassland flickered twice and then fell silent. In the end, the sky did not change. However, soon, a bloody wind blew across the grassland, and the surrounding grass solidified and hardened under the blowing of the bloody wind. The weeds were like sharp swords rising straight to the sky. Han Yu, who was hiding in the grass, was aghast. She had seen a lot of original magical abilities, but the King Pill level original magical ability that could exist independently in the Yuanying stage level original magical ability was extremely rare. In particular, when the other party's bloody wind blew, the whole grassland seemed to no longer belong to her. In particular, she saw with her own eyes that in just a few breaths of time, the weeds beside her extended, solidified, and finally, under the nourishment of the rain, turned into an emerald green sword with a rich metallic luster. Even her breathing stopped for a moment. The next moment, the sharp sword flashed and stabbed toward her. Although the grass sword was crushed by the Yuanying stage cultivator's protective aura shield the moment it left the ground, this scene still shocked Han Yu. What kind of magical ability was this? It could actually corrode her original magical ability? The original magical ability could only be covered by a more powerful and higher-level magical ability. Just now, the brief change of color in the sky meant that although the other party's original magical ability was strong, it was still not the opponent of Yuanying stage cultivator. However, the subsequent corrosion and assimilation of the grassland meant that the level of the other party's magical ability was extremely high. She could not wait any longer. Han Yu decided to end the battle quickly. At this moment, she felt that there were hidden dangers everywhere around her, and her torrential rain could do nothing to the other party's golden sword defense. She could not win by relying on the magical ability alone, so Han Yu had to do it herself. With a thought, her body melted in the torrential rain, and in the blink of an eye, she got rid of the threat of the grassland sword forest and approached Wang Lu. However, when she got closer, she found that the golden sword defense seemed to have no flaws at all. Unless she used the power of Yuanying stage to forcibly suppress it, there was no way to break it. Then she would use force to suppress it. Han Yu whistled, and the torrential rain became even more violent. After a moment, the sound of rolling tides came from afar, and the grassland actually set off a storm. The huge waves that were hundreds of feet high came pressing like a mountain, really overwhelming. This was Han Yu's understanding of water. Ever since she was cultivating in the deep mountains, she saw with her own eyes that the torrential rain broke down a mountain, and the floodwaters rolled down the gravel, sweeping away everything along the way. She then condensed this original magical ability. When she pushed her magical power to the extreme, she could crush everything with the pressure of the water. Wang Lu softly snorted. Regarding this storm, he did not want to fight it head-on. Using his middle-level King Pill cultivation base to compete with a Taoist master of Yuanying stage in terms of magical power was simply courting death. "Luli, give me a hand." Luli didn't speak, but she already held the skybreaker in her hand. Her whole magical power was condensed on the sword, waiting for Wang Lu's order to release the strongest blow in her current stage. Although she often seemed to have lost her mind, after entering the fighting state, Luli's keen intuition could guide her to make the correct response in the first place. Seeing this situation, Wang Lu immediately changed his original plan. Instead, based on his intuition, he reached out to hold Luli's hand that held the sword. Primal Chaos Heaven-splitting sword chi brewed for a moment, and then poured into the skybreaker through the place where the two of them held each other. Suddenly, this immortal sword burst out an unprecedented terrifying fluctuation. The sword wave swept across, and thousands of cracks appeared on the ground within the radius of 300 meters. And this was just the aftermath that was subconsciously released. With the cooperation of Primal Chaos Heaven-splitting sword chi, and the skybreaker as the foundation, and then through Luli's brilliant sword heart, Wang Lu already felt that his primordial spirit had the tendency to collapse under the resonance. This was not a power that could be controlled by the King Pill stage. Wang Lu didn't dare to wait any longer. He immediately joined hands with Luli to send out this sword strike with all his strength. The skybreaker drew a gray line in front of the huge wave that ran through the heaven and earth. At that moment, the heaven and earth stagnated. The roaring wave was blocked by an invisible force for a moment, and time seemed to have stopped. Then the giant wave split to the left and right, revealing a bottomless canyon in the middle. The flood that Han Yu tried her best to summon was divided into two parts along the gray line. Han Yu flew above the flood and inconceivably watched as the flood that could no longer be closed roared past both sides of Wang Lu's non-phase sword defense. The next moment, a mouthful of blood overflowed from her mouth. As a Taoist master of Yuanying stage, Han Yu's original magical ability had been broken by that sword strike, and she was injured by the backlash. However, the power of Primal Chaos Heaven-splitting sword chi was still not seen the bottom. After a while, even the ground disintegrated, opening up a bottomless crack. The clouds in the sky were unprecedentedly turbulent, and in the darkness a line of light appeared. Although the Primal Chaos Heaven-splitting sword chi broke out in a flash, its power has penetrated the entire space, causing continuous damage. More and more blood flowed out of Han Yu's mouth. No matter how hard she tried, she could not stop the disintegration of her original magical ability. Finally, the rainy night in the prairie turned into countless fragments. Han Yu staggered a bit and then fell to the ground. However, Wang Lu was not happy at all. Just now, although that sword strike gave him an unprecedented experience, which benefited him and Lu Li endlessly, it also created an unprecedentedly powerful enemy. After Han Yu fell to the ground, in the middle of the room, Moonless has stood in front of her. This Taoist master of deity stage had a faint smile on her face, but from time to time, her shaking right hand showed her anger at the scene before her. "Do you have anything to say?" Moonless smilingly asked Wang Lu. Wang Lu had no doubt that her hidden subtext was for him to say his last words. No matter how much Moonless valued him before, this scene was a slap in her face, and a political figure could not allow her face to be dirty. However, Wang Lu was already prepared for this scene. He smiled and said to Moonless, "Your harem needs to be reformed. The original harem fighting system can only cultivate waste that is not commensurate with your reputation, just like those lying at my feet." Wang Lu said with a nasal voice of disdain, and then said, "You started your career with military exploits, but your harem has even forgotten the basic fighting skills. Such a harem is empty, but it's laughable." So, Moonless declined to comment on this. "So, after thinking about it, I decided to offer you a strategy." Moonless kicked a fainted concubine at her feet. "Is this the strategy you offered?" Wang Lu said, "Yes, this is part of the strategy. Because from now on, I want the harem to be like a battlefield where strength is respected. Every 5 years, a harem competition will be held in Moon Capital, and the winner will be the harem master for 5 years. In this way, the survival of the fittest can cultivate a harem worthy of your name." Harem competition? Moonless narrowed her eyes and began to seriously consider this unheard of creativity. There had never been such a harem in heavenly earth, but it was undeniably very interesting. In particular, it seemed fun to let her concubines fight each other for the throne of the harem master. Very good. In the end, Moonless nodded and said, "Since you have this idea, then do it for me." Chapter 556. Senior Brother. Do you really want to hold a tournament? In the bedroom, Lu Li sat on the bed and curiously asked. Her eyes were full of eagerness to try. Wang Lu said, "Of course it's a good opportunity. Although there are many wastewood in Moonless harem, there are also many experts. The main concubine Xiao Yun, is a Yuanying stage expert. On paper, her strength is stronger than that of the guard captain, Han Yu. Unfortunately, after so many years of fighting in the harem, their brains have become stupid. They may not even be able to use 20 to 30% of their ability. Now give them a chance to adjust their state. 5 days later, when the tournament begins, we will have endless experience." Good. Lu Li couldn't help but begin to stroke her own sword, Skybreaker. Although most of the people in the harem had higher cultivation base than her, Lu Li still had a strong desire to fight. She could not wait to fight with everyone, including Wang Lu himself. It was good to take risks and have fun with Wang Lu, but it would be even better if she could have the opportunity to consolidate her cultivation base and refine her sword intent. For Wang Lu, things had to be a bit more complicated. From the beginning, Wang Lu's actions were not simple. The adoption of the whimsical proposal of the harem tournament was not based on luck. According to Moonless temper, it was almost impossible for her to tolerate others' offense, let alone fighting with the concubines in the harem of Moon Capital, and even injuring the guard captain. Let alone Li Yan's friend who wrote the recommendation letter. Even if Li Yan herself was here, Moonless would still be ruthless in order to maintain her dignity. Of course, the idea of the harem tournament was indeed good, but the one who came up with this idea, Wang Lu, at most deserved to die a quick death. He didn't need to be thrown into the dark side of the moon to be tortured before his death. What really made Moonless hold back was the sword strike that broke Han Yu's original magical ability by Wang Lu. With the combined power of Wang Lu and Lu Li, and then perfectly guided by Skybreaker, the power of that sword strike was enough to make most of the Taoist masters of Yuanying stage palpitate. Of course, it was far from being a threat to a soul formation cultivator. If that sword was aimed at Moonless, she wouldn't even need to use a magic treasure. She could block that sword with her physical body alone. However, the point of Wang Lu's sword attack was not to injure the enemy, but to demonstrate a problem. How could a king pill cultivator make such a sword attack? Although there were many king pill cultivators in the world, to be able to slash out such an earth-shattering sword was probably unheard of by many. This kind of king pill could not be a nameless person. The backer behind him was very likely to be terrifying, so Moonless would not take the risk to provoke him. Harmonious Heaven, the 7th rank of the 9 heavens of Temple of Heaven, was indeed powerful, but compared with a person who could cultivate such a powerful king pill, Harmonious Heaven still seemed insignificant. Moonless was arrogant, brutal, and headstrong. However, as a political figure, she had absolutely qualified political acumen. In the Palace of Heaven, she was like a vassal king, so there was no room for her to go further. Therefore, she used all her acumen on how to keep her current position. Whether it was the sky-covering moon capital, the extravagance of the wine pool and the forest of meat, or even the huge debauchery and tyrannical harem, they were all means for her to show her ambition to others. Only those who did not move forward would be extravagant, and those who had far-reaching plans would often pretend to be a moral saint. Thus, in the Palace of Heaven, her goal was naturally just a vassal king, and she would not ask for more. At the same time, she would never offend people that she shouldn't offend. It was this complex political motive that made Moonless finally tolerate Wang Lu's rudeness, and even appointed him to complete the preparation for the harem tournament. In the next few days, presumably, Moonless would exhaust her resources to dig out the details of Wang Lu and Lu Li. Of course, it was impossible for her to get any result. However, because she couldn't get the result, she would be afraid to act rashly. With the wisdom of Moonless, she would eventually find that Wang Lu and Lu Li had no backing in the heavenly earth. However, no one knew how long it would take. At least, it was enough for Wang Lu to use this time to use the resources in Moonless' hands to ruthlessly gain a lot of experience. For the current Wang Lu and Lu Li, there was nothing more suitable than a hardy tournament. Most of the opponents were between King Pill stage and Yuanying stage, which was exactly the level that the two of them needed to deal with seriously. They even had to take some risks, but not to the extent that they couldn't deal with it. Moreover, according to the rules of Moonless, life and death in the tournament was up to fate, so they could unscrupulously kill each other. The life and death battle was unusual. After each battle, the benefit was more than 10 times that of an ordinary battle. Of course, the premise was that they didn't suffer irrecoverable serious damage in the battle. It could be said that it was a way of cultivation where risk and benefit coexisted. Only such a growth rate could satisfy the needs of Wang Lu and Lu Li. The Moon Capital Harem tournament kicked off on time 5 days later. The venue was located in the middle of Moon Capital, on the training field belonging to Moonless. Under the careful planning of Wang Lu, although it was only 5 days, the opening ceremony still presented a series of wonderful programs, dazzling and too much for the eyes to take in. The Moon Capital guards around the training field all stared intently. Although the rules of duty did not allow them to make any response, their focused posture still exposed their true thoughts. At the top of the center of the audience, even the always scheming and unsmiling imperial concubine Xiao Yun revealed a smile from time to time. While pointing at the programs and actors on the training field, she talked to Moonless. She was talking and Moonless was listening. From beginning to end, Moonless didn't say a word. When the opening ceremony ended, the first round of the tournament soon began. The actors who were still gorgeously dressed on the training field immediately put on their uniforms and waited for the start of their turn with a solemn look. Even the imperial concubine came down from the stage and put on a light and gorgeous fighting suit. Thus, in the entire audience, except for a few bureaucrats who were deeply trusted by Moonless and Moonless herself, there was no one else. Then, in the first match, I will fight against Xiao Murong. In the middle of the training field, Wang Lu, who was both the host and the contestant of the first match, said with a smile. At the same time, a woman with a face full of anger came to the stage and looked at Wang Lu. Her eyes seemed as if they were about to spit fire. Xiao Murong was the imperial concubine who was mistaken by Wang Lu as the imperial concubine 5 days ago, and then punched out 10 feet of blood. At that time, she took several of her men to find trouble for Wang Lu and Lu Li. That was also the rule of the elders in the harem to train the newcomers, who knew that this newcomer completely didn't know what the rules were. With 3 punches, the prestige that Xiao Murong had painstakingly built up in the harem for many years was gone. Those who had seen her nosebleed violently and fall unconscious would no longer have any respect for her. Even her previous backer, concubine Xiao Yun, would no longer see her. Thus, Xiao Murong could no longer find a place in the harem, unless she could defeat this opponent in the martial arts arena and wash away her shame. She had no way out. 5 days was not enough for her to completely recover the spirit, energy, and spirit of the Temple of Heaven ascetic nun before she entered the harem, but she still had the confidence to defeat her opponent. Because in Wang Lu's hand was the sword of Mount Kuan, not the Skybreaker, and in Xiao Murong's hand was the spirit sword Faceless Moon, that she borrowed from imperial concubine Xiao Yun. Without the Skybreaker, she didn't believe that a mere middle-rank King Pill could make an earth-shattering sword strike. And she, as the peak of King Pill, with the help of Faceless Moon, dared to compete with a Taoist master of Yuanying stage. Under such circumstances she had a chance of winning. In fact, after the start of the battle, Xiao Murong indeed grasped the initiative on the scene for a time. The more than 1 meter long sword Faceless Moon was like a dexterous dagger in her hand. Combined with the yin and yang heart protection mirror, it made the martial arts arena constantly change day and night. The flying sword sometimes appeared in her hand, and sometimes it was used by her to attack the enemy from a distance. Sometimes the sword light was as fine as a crescent moon, and sometimes it was as round and flawless as a full moon. Xiao Murong had almost recovered more than 90% of her peak strength. The speed of her sword momentum was dazzling, and it seemed that the newcomer was completely suppressed. But it didn't take long for people to find that no matter how Xiao Murong changed, the golden sword defense did not budge. The long-haired woman in the middle of the sword defense, which was the image that Wang Lu now used to show people, almost yawned. Xiao Murong's face was red, and she felt deeply ashamed. So she stopped the flashy sword momentum and began to concentrate her strength on one point. Faceless Moon was a spirit sword. If the difference in sword spirit was not taken into account, its grade was actually higher than that of the sword of Mount Kuan. Driven by Xiao Murong with all her strength, the body of the sword was flowing with the most refined and pure moonlight, as if it wanted to make the real moon feel ashamed. The next moment, just as the sword momentum was about to be fully charged, Xiao Murong suddenly broke out, trying to catch her opponent off guard. In her opinion, the reason that Wang Lu was able to keep his sword defense from being broken under the previous intensive offensive was more or less due to his prediction. So, as long as she could break the opponent's prediction, she could break the opponent's sword defense. Xiao Murong's sword moved up, ensuring that every bit of strength she had was squeezed into Faceless Moon. The spirit sword flew up in an instant, and she also flew up in an instant. The opponent on the martial arts arena rapidly expanded in her field of vision, and she looked like she was still caught off guard. Victory seemed to be at her fingertips. Then Xiao Murong felt a tremendous force explode from the sword in her hand, then surged along her arm and spread all over her body. Her body, which had been tempered thousands of times during the King Pill realm, seemed extremely fragile under the pressure of the tremendous force. Her bones broke one by one, and her muscles were twisted into a ball. At the last moment before her consciousness disappeared, she vaguely saw her brain burst out, and the audience present was extremely shocked to see such a scene. Xiao Murong attacked with all her strength, and her momentum was like a rainbow. Then the spirit sword collided with the golden sword defense. With a muffled bang, the sword defense trembled slightly, but Xiao Murong turned into a mass of minced meat. Phew, it looks like I won. After putting away the sword of Mount Kuan, Wang Lu waved to the silent surroundings, and then walked down the martial arts arena under the increasingly solemn gaze of Moonless. When he stepped down from the arena, he clenched his fists, which was a small celebration. This was the first time that he combined the counterattack sword momentum of non-phase sword with primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi in actual combat. While rebounding the opponent's attack, he also added his own strength. Therefore, at that moment, Xiao Murong and the others simultaneously suffered a full blow from the peak of the King Pill realm, plus Wang Lu's heaven-splitting sword chi. Even if she had 10 yin and yang heart protection mirrors, she would not be able to save her life. And such an achievement could only be quickly condensed in a life-and-death battle. It was unknown how long it would take to truly perfect this move, by relying on closed-door cultivation and primordial spirit deduction. Wang Lu looked up at the harem concubines who were watching the match from the contestants' seats, but what he saw was a mass of fat and plentiful experience points. Chapter 557. On the first day of the tournament, there were a total of 6 rounds of matches. 6 winners were decided, but at the same time, 6 corpses were left behind. The death rate of the losers reached an astonishing 100%, which was far beyond the expectations of many people. Before this, people thought that although the competition was a matter of life and death, everyone was sisters. Even if they had been fighting in the harem for so many years, there was still friendship between them, so they would not kill each other. But the reality was that the friendship in the harem could not be taken seriously at all. Those good sisters who usually smiled on the surface were more efficient than anyone else when it came to killing each other in the martial arts arena. Before the fight, the two would still talk about trivial matters and recall the good times they had spent together. They even agreed to taste the cooking of Moon Capital's chefs after the competition. But in the blink of an eye, the mask of goodwill was torn off, and the life of the other party was taken away in an unprecedented cruel way. Then they looked at the corpse on the ground with a vengeful gaze and lamented how she deserved it. What's more, they exposed all kinds of dark secrets of the harem in public, as if they could finally vent out their pent-up frustrations for many years. The cruelty and indifference of these harem concubines shocked the bureaucrats under Moonless. Even Moonless herself frowned deeply, and her killing intent gradually condensed. She was deeply disappointed with the beauties in her harem, not disappointed with their ignorance of the general interest. In fact, for so many years, the principle of Moonless management of the harem was to let those cultivators, who used to be independent, become deaf and blind in the cramped harem cage, and eventually become ignorant. Not understanding the general interest was not actually wrong, but the mistake was that they could no longer please their master. Moonless sat on the high throne and watched the 6 matches with cold eyes. Except for the first match between Wang Lu and Xiao Murong, where the combination of non-phase Nameless Sword and Primal Chaos Sword Qi made her eyes light up, the remaining 5 matches seemed boring. With her vision as a deity-stage Taoist master, the matches of several King Pill level were not worth mentioning at all. What she wanted was something else. She wanted to know how the concubines, who had been kept as pets by her for decades, would perform in the martial arts arena. She was looking forward to all kinds of complex human nature blooming on that vast but narrow stage. But in the end, all she saw was disappointment. The inexplicable hatred and the complaints of gratitude and grudges made her feel deeply bored. The competition on the second day was still the same. The concubines fought in the ugliest way possible. Under the test of life and death, they exposed their darkest side. On this day, the number of people in the auditorium had been reduced by half, and Moonless' face was covered with frost from beginning to end, causing the concubines in the martial arts arena to keep quiet out of fear. It was not until the beginning of the 5th match, when the girl named Luli stepped onto the stage, that Moonless showed a bit of interest. Luli had yet to pass the King Pill tribulation. Although everything was ready right now, she was still in peak shoot on stage, and her opponent was the right-hand woman of the main concubine Xiao Yun, the genius cultivator of the former Jade Cold Pool, Qi Chongying. King Pill's cultivation level was at the peak, and she had a natal artifact that she had personally refined, the solidifying jade bottle. There were 3 rivers and 5 seas in the bottle, the accumulation of Qi Chongying's 100 years of cultivation. In terms of fighting ability, Qi Chongying could be ranked in the top 5 in the entire harem of Moon Capital. For Luli, drawing such an opponent seemed to be extremely disadvantageous. However, she looked very excited. There was not the slightest fear in her eyes, and the corner of her mouth was even slightly raised, revealing a clear smile. Qi Chongying just sneered at this. During this period of time, she had heard people say that among the 2 newcomers, the taller one was shrewd and treacherous. Moreover, her strength was superior, far from being measured in terms of cultivation level. However, the more plump one was a pure fool. Apart from eating, she only giggled. Tisk, she's still giggling. Does she really think that she, a mere Shudan, is qualified to survive in the tournament? What a joke. Thinking of this, Chi Chongying's heart gradually became hostile and murderous. She had no enmity with Lu Li, but in the previous 10 rounds of competition, the result of the 10 corpses had made her tacitly agree that the rule of this harem tournament was death. Moreover, from her point of view, it was perfectly justified to kill a baby-faced girl, a newcomer who was likely to threaten her harem status. Therefore, when the tournament officially began, she immediately turned the solidifying jade bottle, and the waves of the 3 rivers and 5 seas surged out from the mouth of the bottle. The momentum of the waves was not inferior to Han Yu's original magical ability. For a Shudan cultivator, once caught in the flood, it would be a dead end. Lu Li's offense was strong, but her defense was weak. If she was really trapped in the endless flood, it would indeed be difficult for her to get out. However, the keen intuition given to her by Brilliant Sword Heart allowed her to intuit this from the beginning. When the mouth of Chi Chongying's solidifying jade bottle had just tilted down, 12 flying swords flew out from Lu Li's sleeve and went straight to the mouth of the solidifying jade bottle, as if to destroy the mouth of the bottle with sharp sword momentum, so that the flood would be smothered in the bottle. Chi Chongying inwardly praised her cleverness, and then inwardly laughed at her for being a fool. The cleverness was that the other party could see that the biggest problem of the solidifying jade bottle was the mouth of the bottle. The fool was that as the owner of the solidifying jade bottle, how could she not know this defect? The most vulnerable place had already been laid out by her with the most powerful trap, and the other party's flying swords were precisely the same as walking right into the trap. Although Lu Li's most powerful sword, the Skybreaker, was still in her hand, these 12 flying swords were obviously not ordinary. They must be her important magical treasure. Thus, she would first collect these 12 swords, and then slowly deal with her. Chi Chongying slightly withdrew her hand from the bottom of the bottle, and immediately, a powerful suction force gushed out from the mouth of the bottle. The 12 flying swords lost control in midair, cut off their connection with their master, and were shakily sucked into the bottle. Chi Chongying smiled and felt the abundant spiritual power in the solidifying jade bottle. The next moment her smile froze. The energy in the bottle soared, and in a split second, it broke through the safety threshold of the solidifying jade bottle. She tried to release the seal on the mouth of the bottle, but it was too late. The solidifying jade bottle exploded in front of her eyes, and the water of the 3 rivers and 5 seas burst out, instantly drowning her. Chi Chongying didn't even have the time to feel the pain of her palm being crushed, nor did she have the time to suppress the shattered jade mansion with her primordial spirit. She only felt that she was like a duckweed under a huge wave, and then in the torrential flood, a primal chaos sword light came at her face, taking away her last wisp of consciousness. Outside the training field, the main concubine Xiao Yun, suddenly got up and looked at the training field in disbelief. In her line of sight, Lu Li was stepping on the flying sword in her hand, avoiding the violent eruption of the flood. The training field of Moon Capital had been purified by a Taoist master of deity stage, so the space was very malleable. From the outside it seemed to be only 300 meters square, but the actual space inside could accommodate a mountain range. However, at this time most of it was submerged by the flood. Lu Li floated above the ocean, giggled, and then waved her slender hand. Suddenly, a simple and unadorned sword drilled out of the water and came to her side. It was Lu Li's Skybreaker. Concubine Xiao Yun immediately took a closer look and suddenly found out that the flying sword under Lu Li's foot was not Skybreaker, but just a gale sword. With the strength of concubine Xiao Yun's Yuanying stage primordial spirit, she immediately began to recall every scene that she saw just now. Thus, she soon found out that just now, at the critical moment when Chi Chongying released the 3 rivers water and collected the flying sword, Lu Li, with her Brilliant Sword Heart's magical ability, changed the position of Skybreaker and the Gale Sword. What a cunning little girl! Concubine Xiao Yun glared at her and gnashed her teeth. With Lu Li's peak Shudan stage strength, coupled with Brilliant Sword Heart's full control of Skybreaker, she could indeed bring great trouble to Chi Chongying, and was even hopeful to seriously injure her. However, The jade condensation bottle was indeed worthy to be the magical treasure of a peak Taoist master of King Pil. Once the 3 rivers and 5 seas came out, Qi Qiangying could completely survive in the water and could not be killed. On the other hand, Lu Li couldn't stand the consumption of a protracted fight. In a full frontal confrontation, as long as her sword couldn't kill the opponent, Lu Li would be defeated without a doubt. In fact, before the fight, concubine Xiao Yun had told Qi Qiangying to use her advantage in cultivation base to deal with the opponent, so that she would have a 10% chance of winning. However, unexpectedly, the other party completely saw through their calculation and used an exceptionally treacherous little trick to directly kill Qi Qiangying, so that the opponent's magical ability could not be used. It was indeed a good calculation. If they fought with cultivation base, no matter how strong Skybreaker was, its power would still be limited by its master's strength. Qi Qiangying could completely deal with it, but Qi Qiangying accidentally fell into the trap and put her Skybreaker into the jade condensation bottle. The jade condensation bottle, which had barely reached the level of spiritual treasure and had yet to give birth to its spirit, actually had to contain the 3 rivers and 5 seas as well as an ancient immortal sword? Let alone in an unguarded situation? Qi Qiangying thought that the 12 flying swords that came in were magical treasure level, so the jade condensation bottle was more than enough. However, unexpectedly, there was actually an immortal sword hidden inside. How could the jade condensation bottle bear it? Naturally, it instantly burst. Whether it was concubine Xiao Yun or Qi Qiangying, they both thought that this would be a one-sided fight. Whether it was cultivation base or wisdom, Qi Qiangying was far above the opponent. However, unexpectedly, they correctly estimated the cultivation base but miscalculated the IQ. You hit it well, little girl. But the tournament has just begun, so we will meet again. Concubine Xiao Yun coldly said to Lu Li, I hope at that time, your little cleverness can still save your life. With that, concubine Xiao Yun turned around and left, not even saying goodbye to Moonless. Moderately presumptuous was her privilege as the Empress, but Moonless didn't care. Her eyes were still on Lu Li. Just now, that decisive sword strike had aroused her great interest, especially that Skybreaker. However, Lu Li didn't realize that her immortal sword had aroused the interest of a Taoist master of deity stage. She was still immersed in great joy. The girl turned her head to look at Wang Lu outside the arena and loudly shouted, Senior sister. Just now she praised me as smart. Lu Li is also praised as smart. Wang Lu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Smart. Perhaps. That last-minute sword strike was indeed smart, but it had nothing to do with IQ. What really played a role was Lu Li's intuition that was keener than a beast. Under the brilliant sword heart, the girl would not miss any opportunity. Even if she herself was unaware of that opportunity, her subconscious reaction would be to cut her throat. In fact, this was the real terrifying part of the brilliant sword heart. Compared to the all-conquering attack power, the key was the intuition that could bring this attack power to the limit. With such judgment, even if Lu Li was only in peak Shudan stage, she would still be able to succeed in every endeavor in this harem tournament. However, the real test was still behind. Judging from the reaction of Moonless, perhaps this farce of a harem tournament would not end well. It was time to consider when to withdraw. Chapter 558. Starting from the 3rd day of the tournament, the atmosphere finally cooled down. There were no more scenes of shrews fighting each other, and the casualty rate also plummeted. Both sides went all out, perfectly displaying the spirit of competition, and won the applause of the audience. As for Moonless, her expression was still indifferent, but it was no longer overcast, which made many people greatly relieved. However, Wang Lu knew that the calmer Moonless was, the less time was left for him. As the organizer of the tournament so far, all the situations were in his plan, including the bloody and violent scene of the previous 2 days, as well as Moonless' initial anger, were all in his careful plan. However, now the situation had gradually begun to get out of his control. The purpose of Wang Lu's tournament was straightforward: to borrow Moonless harem members to give himself some experience, and then wait for the opportunity to run away. Although these harem members lacked actual combat experience, and they had been fighting in the harem for many years. Most of them were, after all, monks of the Temple of Heaven. Their basic skills were quite solid, and their magical treasures and props were also endless. Even if such an opponent was not a strong enemy, it was also not a weakling. However, there must be a suitable excuse to brush other people's harem. No matter how ruthless Moonless was to her harem, she would not let others slaughter her. Therefore, Wang Lu designed a life and death tournament. At the same time, in order to guide Moonless' mood, he also deliberately designed the scene of the previous 2 days. On the surface, he designed the tournament to determine the opponent by drawing lots, but through under-the-table manipulation, he arranged the people who had grudges against each other as his opponents. Especially in the first few groups, their hatred was absolutely irreconcilable. Then, as the contestant in the first group, he crushed his opponent into minced meat in an extremely ruthless way, which directly brought the bloody atmosphere to the arena. Then, even if it was inertia, it would make the contestants behind him kill each other. This kind of inferior fighting scene was deliberately done by Wang Lu, and as expected, Moonless was deeply dissatisfied with it. Thus, in the midst of Moonless' dissatisfaction, the 2 fights between Wang Lu and Lu Li stood out and decisively won the interest of Moonless. Wang Lu's original intention was to let Moonless' interest support her to continue to watch, and as long as Moonless was interested in the fight between Wang Lu and Lu Li, they could safely continue to fight in the arena until the harem concubines were either killed or injured. At that time, Wang Lu and Lu Li, who had gained enough experience, could also prepare to withdraw. But now this step had to be brought forward. His and Lu Li's performance did arouse the interest of Moonless, but Moonless' interest was obviously beyond expectation. Especially when she looked at the immortal sword Skybreaker, the greed in her eyes became more and more obvious. Wang Lu knew that he seemed to have underestimated the greed of Moonless as a vassal king. He thought that with the previous sword strike that he and Lu Li launched together, with his own non-phase method and primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi, he could create a great enough backing to make Moonless hesitate to take action. However, unexpectedly, the king of Palace of Heaven was already on the verge of being blinded by greed. Aside from being a political figure, Moonless was also a cultivator, a powerful cultivator that could be counted on one's fingers in the heavenly earth. Although she was not a sword cultivator in the strict sense, the Skybreaker had a supreme attraction to any cultivator. Wang Lu believed that when she witnessed Lu Li defeating Qi Qiangying with the power of the Skybreaker, the greed in her heart became more and more uncontrollable. That being the case, Wang Lu had to speed up the process. On the one hand, he revised the match list, so that the viewing value of the tournament skyrocketed, in an attempt to distract Moonless' attention. On the other hand, "Thank you for letting me win." Wang Lu cupped his hands toward the woman who knelt on one knee in front of him, and then floated down the arena. With Primal Chaos Heaven-splitting Sword Chi as the main attack and non-phase sword defense as the main defense, Wang Lu used 113 moves to defeat a low-level Yuanying stage concubine. And in order to win, the other party even burned a lot of her innate vitality. This fight could be called the most wonderful fight since the beginning of the tournament. Wang Lu fought a Yuanying stage cultivator with the King Pill. Although the process was more daunting than dangerous, it was not easy. Therefore, the harvest was unprecedentedly rich. He clearly felt that his primordial spirit was more condensed, his jade mansion more stable, and the King Pill shone brightly with vitality. Just this fight alone was better than a month of closed-door training. However, the problem was that, according to this momentum, Wang Lu's next opponent would be the main concubine Xiao Yun. This was, of course, the result of the black box operation. Otherwise, concubine Xiao Yun should have met Lu Li in the next round. However, Wang Lu forced her to be in front of him. Concubine Xiao Yun, of course, also guessed that Wang Lu was behind this operation, but she didn't care. Whether it was Wang Lu or Lu Li, in her opinion, it was all the same. The two of them were in the same group, so whoever they taught a lesson to was the same. And no matter who it was, she had enough confidence that she could win. Concubine Xiao Yun was different from the other concubines in the harem. She was Moonless' legal spouse, no doubt the mistress of the harem. She was of noble birth, and her strength was far more powerful than her peers. Even Moonless himself was not her opponent in the same stage. Moonless opening a harem in Moon Capital was also the result of concubine Xiao Yun's acquiescence. If not, even with Moonless' overbearing attitude, he wouldn't be able to open a harem. Concubine Xiao Yun has seen the strength of Wang Lu and Lu Li very clearly. If they were in the same stage, she was far from their opponent. However, she was now a middle-level Yuanying stage cultivator, with more than 100 years of cultivation, and full of magical treasures. Even the martial arts arena in Moon Capital was personally built by her. The time, place, and people were all on her side, so what if Wang Lu was strong? In view of this, please allow me to go out and purchase some props and equipment for combat preparation. In the inner hall of Moon Capital, Wang Lu submitted an application to Moonless to go out. Moonless was lying on the throne of Moon Capital. The red eye of the skull face carefully looked at Wang Lu, and then sneered. What a lame reason. Do you think I will give you the opportunity to escape? Wang Lu avoided Moonless' question and insisted on his own opinion. Although the inventory in Moon Capital is rich, the props that I need are not here. Moonless sneered. What do you need? Just give me the list and I will have someone to purchase it for you. In the Palace of Heaven there is nothing that I can't buy. Wang Lu said, the authority of Moonless harmonious heaven is supreme in the Palace of Heaven, and I have a deep understanding of this. However, the Palace of Heaven is not just your own Palace of Heaven. As the Empress, concubine Xiao Yun's authority is second only to you. I'm worried that my list would fall into her hands not long after it is sent out. If so, my card would be exposed to concubine Xiao Yun in advance, which would be too disadvantageous for me. Oh, you have a sharp tongue. Moonless still sneered. Then try to overcome the disadvantageous conditions to fight. You are a sword cultivator, so you should have the willpower to overcome all difficulties. Wang Lu said. So I am now trying to overcome your obstruction and fight for a chance to win for myself. I know that you are worried that I will run away, so I will leave a hostage in Moon Capital. My junior sister Lu Li will stay here. If I don't return, she will be at your disposal. What a joke. Aren't the two of you at my disposal now? Wang Lu still avoided the threat of Moonless and continued his own topic. Moreover, if I can win, it will also be a great advantage for you, won't it? Moon Capital doesn't need two masters, and the harem doesn't need an empress with weak authority. Unfortunately, there are some things that are not easy for you to do, but in the arena of life and death, everything is possible. All you have to do is to give me a chance. Moonless suddenly opened his right eye. Very well, then I will give you a chance. But if you don't do what you promised, Wang Lu said with a smile, it's easy for you to take my life. After Wang Lu walked out of Moon Capital, he went straight to the barren mountain on the border. The secret agent of Palace of Heaven, who followed behind him, only followed for a short distance before he disappeared without a trace. When he wanted to follow again, he was blocked by two primal chaos heaven-splitting sword cheese that came from nowhere. In desperation, the secret agent of Palace of Heaven had to turn back and pray that he would not be slapped to death by the angry Lady Harmonious Heaven. After returning to Moon Capital, the secret agent was not killed by Moonless. After listening to the report, she remained silent and then left the throne in a flash and came to a bedroom in the harem. A girl as clear as jade and as elegant as a sword sat on the futon, closed her eyes and meditated, cultivating her spirit and nourishing her sword. She placed the skybreaker on her chest, forming a mysterious channel between her and the sword. What a brilliant sword heart! What a great immortal sword skybreaker! Seeing this scene, Moonless could not help but feel a little envious. If she could have such a qualification, such an immortal sword, perhaps she would no longer be the present her. The vassal king of harmonious heaven sounded awe-inspiring. But compared with those who truly walked on the top of the immortal path, what did she have? However, while Moonless was in a trance, the girl in front of her had become erratic and vaguely illusory. Moonless instantly reacted. What was left in the bedroom was just a brilliant illusion. Once a deity stage cultivator approached it, the illusion would be difficult to maintain. As for the real person, no one knew how far she had run away. Moonless' anger suddenly erupted. What a bold girl. The next moment, the left hand of the white bone stretched out, and the power of death shrouded her. The bedroom seemed to be filled with the wailing of millions of wronged souls. And Lu Li's figure broke and disappeared without a trace. There was only the immortal sword Skybreaker floating in midair. Feeling the approaching power of death, the immortal sword issued a sharp buzzing sound, which in a split second, squeezed out the elegy of the wronged souls, causing Moonless to feel the turbulence in her jade mansion. What a great immortal sword! Even without a master, it could shake a Taoist master of deity stage with its own power alone. However, it was, after all, an ownerless object. Moonless retracted her left hand and stretched out her right hand, which symbolized life, and directly touched the hilt of the Skybreaker. Immediately, the sword transmitted a countershock force. However, the sharp turn of life and death weakened the countershock force a lot. Moonless focused her mind and quickly suppressed the Skybreaker. Then, looking at the empty bedroom, a trace of amusement welled up in her heart. Two little guys, using an immortal sword to play the cicada shedding its carapace? How audacious, sharp, and decisive. Were it not for the immortal sword, as the master of Moon Capital, how could Moonless not notice that Lu Li's aura had disappeared from Moon Capital? Even the way she escaped could be guessed by Moonless. It must be that when Wang Lu left, he took away her Skybreaker, and then Lu Li used the method of person and sword exchange to put the Skybreaker in Moon Capital, and then her real body escaped. However, leaving behind the Skybreaker was not a loss. It was just that, why did she always feel that she missed a trick? However, just as Moonless intended to further explore the Skybreaker, the sword in her hand suddenly swayed. The quaint sword disappeared and was replaced by a flaming flying sword. Moonless was stunned for a moment, and then she angrily crushed the flaming sword with her left hand made of white bone. Lu Li could not only exchange the person and the sword, but she could also freely exchange the position of different flying swords. Just a day ago, she used this trick to trick Qi Qiangying into putting the Skybreaker into the solidifying jade bottle, which led to the tragedy. And now she used this trick to exchange the civet cat for the crown prince. Shay, you two have done a good job. Moonless softly said to herself. Her voice was trembling, her body was trembling, the whole moon was trembling, and so was the palace of heaven. Within 3 days I will take the lives of the two of you. The determination of a Taoist master of deity stage turned into a thunderbolt from the blue sky. Chapter 559. Shay. That was so dangerous I was almost struck by lightning. Outside the palace of heaven, Wang Lu looked at the bottomless rift behind him with lingering fear. A deity stage cultivator was indeed awesome. Separated by such a long distance, a thunderbolt from the clear sky was powerful enough to turn a king pill level cultivator into ashes. Fortunately, just now, he and Lu Li did not stand under that thunderbolt. Instead, through a substitute sword, they guided the power of the thunderbolt down and completely poured it into the ground. Looking at the deep rift that was split open by the power of the thunderbolt and smelling the pungent burnt smell in the air, Wang Lu could not help but sigh that even though his cultivation base was far inferior to hers, in terms of IQ, he could completely suppress Moonless. Thus, he could guess her every step of reaction in advance and then make arrangements in advance. Through the magical ability of Lu Li's human and sword exchange, Wang Lu successfully helped her escape from Moon Capital. However, immediately after that, they would have to face the full pursuit of a Taoist master of deity stage. Wang Lu didn't think that the time that he had bought would allow the two of them to escape far enough. Therefore, in Moon Capital, Wang Lu simply left some clues for Moonless to actively guide her next move. Lu Li's human and sword exchange was not a flawless escape skill. The reason why she could freely exchange position between human and sword, and even hide from the perception of Moonless as well as the strict monitoring network of Moon Capital, was that Lu Li's brilliant sword heart had refined the flying sword into a part of the cultivator's body. The human and sword exchange was as natural as raising a hand or a foot, and it would not cause any excess magical power fluctuation. However, the flaw was that the connection between the human and sword was too close. Once this point was caught, it could be traced back to her. Secondly, if one wanted to leave an illusion of Lu Li in Moon Capital, in order to delay the time as much as possible, it was necessary to leave a powerful enough immortal sword. Considering the distance and other factors, only Skybreaker could take on this heavy responsibility. However, to leave an immortal sword in Moon Capital, the loss was too heavy. Moreover, the skybreaker had long been an inseparable part of Luli. Once it was taken away, at least half of Luli's cultivation base would be wasted. Therefore, when the illusion was broken, Luli had to immediately swap the two flying swords, replacing the one that was the least involved with the other. However, in front of Moonless, no matter how mysterious this magical ability was, she would still be able to catch some clues. With Moonless' temper, she would definitely take action in anger, and with the ability of a deity stage cultivator, taking the enemy's head from thousands of miles away was as easy as flipping one's hand. Therefore, Wang Lu told Luli to prepare the substitute sword in advance, so that at the critical moment, she could sacrifice a flying sword in exchange for her own life. The result was as expected. After changing back the skybreaker, a bolt of lightning fell from the clear sky. Were it not for Wang Lu's early preparation and promptly escaping with Luli, the two of them would have been seriously injured by this bolt of lightning. After this lightning strike, presumably, Moonless herself would be even more annoyed, because her original intention was not to kill the two of them with the lightning strike, but to seriously injure them. Then she would personally come along with the lightning strike to capture the two of them, and bring them back to Moon Capital to inflict eternal torture on them. However, the result was that Wang Lu and Luli were not hurt by the lightning strike. Moonless' lightning strike only smashed Luli's flying sword, but failed to leave any mark on the two of them. Right now, Moonless could at most carry out a carpet search through the location of the lightning strike, but it was impossible to specifically search for people. Because Wang Lu and Luli had left the boundary of the Palace of Heaven and entered the scope of Sky City. Moonless had great authority in the Palace of Heaven, but it could not be substituted in Sky City. This central city of heavenly earth carried the highest authority of the Temple of Heaven. Among the 9 heavens, Changtian was at the top, while Shuntian and the other 5 lived in Sky City. There were at least dozens of vassal lords like Moonless in Sky City, and Moonless was definitely not the most outstanding among them. Therefore, Wang Lu did not worry that after entering Sky City, Moonless would have the ability to wantonly search for him and Luli. After all, Moonless' status as a vassal lord was too special. Not to mention that she was just a harmonious heaven stage. Even if she was promoted by one stage, it was impossible for her to act recklessly in Sky City. Once it attracted the attention of Changtian, Moonless' throne as a vassal lord would be removed in minutes. So, for the time being we are safe. Luli, during this period of time I will help you heal. And then let's go through the King Pill tribulation together. Luli nodded with a pale face. The girl's face was often full of smile, but at this time it was replaced by a depressed look. He saw that Luli's eyes were without light and her lips were pale. Obviously, her spirit was injured. This was also the price of escape. Even after so many preparations, in the end, the two of them still paid a considerable price. The flying sword that Luli refined into her body was crushed by Moonless and struck by lightning. For her, it was no less than having her 2 arms cut off. Although she was prepared, the injury was still not light. More importantly, Luli was now in the last period of core nourishing stage before the King Pill tribulation. Although the loss of these 2 flying swords was still within the bearable range, it greatly shook her jade mansion, causing the highly condensed Shudan to show irregular tremor. The King Pill tribulation might not be suppressed anymore. In order to achieve the King Pill tribulation, Luli's early preparation was very adequate. Whether it was the level of method, magical power reserve or state of mind, all of them could be said to be perfect. As long as the opportunity came, she could achieve a perfect breakthrough in one fell swoop. However, such a deep accumulation had actually somewhat gone beyond common sense. If it were someone else with half of Luli's accumulation, it would be impossible for them not to break through. The reason why Luli was able to suppress her stage to the present was thanks to her special physique of brilliant sword heart. However, in Moon Capital, the successive battles allowed her to gain rich experience, and then she was continuously shaken by Moonless. Finally, she was somewhat unable to suppress it anymore. With the girl's qualification, there was no bottleneck in achieving the King Pill. If she wanted to achieve it, she could do it at any time. However, at this time she was seriously injured. If she achieved the King Pill in this situation, then the King Pill would be incomplete, and her previous hard work would be in vain. Therefore, Wang Lu must take Luli into the city as soon as possible to heal her injury. Healing in the wilderness was simply courting death. Even if Moonless didn't dare to act rashly in the Sky City, it was easy to secretly capture 2 King Pill-level cultivators in the outskirts. The process of entering the city was smoother than expected. After paying the basic entrance fee and showing the token obtained from the Temple of Gorgeous Town, Wang Lu took Luli into the central city of the Heavenly Earth, which was exactly the same as the last time Wang Lu came alone. It seemed that Moonless didn't infiltrate her forces into the Sky City, which was barely good news. Of course, it was also possible that after Moonless calmed down, she let her people secretly monitor the Sky City, and when the preparation was complete, she would strike like thunder. However, Wang Lu couldn't care less. After entering the Sky City, Wang Lu soon found a high-priced training room for rent. The inside was rich in spiritual energy and had a complete set of medicinal pills, although only relatively speaking. Compared to the training room on the brilliant peak of Spirit Sword Mountain, this place was far inferior, but it could barely meet the needs of Luli. Moreover, Wang Lu had no room to be picky. In the next 3 days, Wang Lu tried his best to help Luli suppress the King Pill and treat her injury. Although he didn't deliberately cultivate the healing immortal method in any case, he still had the cultivation base of the middle-level King Pill, so he quickly helped Luli stabilize. A few days later, Luli began to cross the King Pill. The process was orderly and soon on the right track. It was estimated that in 10 days, she would be able to perfect the pill. This King Pill was not easy to achieve. Once the pill was formed, its quality would probably be unprecedented, comparable to Wang Lu's King Pill that condensed 2 great immortal-level methods. Wang Lu was quite looking forward to this. However, during the condensing of the King Pill, Wang Lu couldn't stay in the training room, so as not to disturb the other party with his own power. Therefore, Wang Lu stood guard outside the door. His non-phase sword defense propped up a faint curtain of light, which excluded all possible interference. On the 3rd day, Luli has reached the final step of condensing her golden core. A perfectly round golden core has been formed in her jade mansion. She only needed to perfectly combine it with her body and primordial spirit, and then it would be a success. Wang Lu had been maintaining his non-phase sword defense outside the training room for 3 days and 3 nights, so he was slightly tired. However, thinking that Luli was about to condense the pill, his faint excitement made the tiredness not worth mentioning. As the saying goes, the closer one gets to the last step, the more careful one must be in all aspects. If something went wrong in the final stage of the King Pill fusion, it would be too late for regrets. Thinking to this, Wang Lu took a deep breath and supported his non-phase sword defense a bit more firmly. In this way, after no one knows how long, he suddenly felt 2 scorching eyes coming from a distance. Wang Lu immediately turned his head, but he only saw a row of snow-white walls. The training room he rented was in a secluded corner on the outskirts of Sky City. Most of the surrounding buildings were empty. They were tall and mighty, but no one lived there. This was a typical planning error of Sky City. However, it was safer to use this place as the place for Luli to condense the pill. In the past few days, he had lit up the sword light of his non-phase sword defense day and night, but no one noticed it. However, unexpectedly, at the critical time, it attracted other people's attention. Wang Lu focused his eyes. His eyes penetrated through the layers of buildings and saw that a few miles away, a woman in a splendid dress was looking at him with surprise and joy. Her eyes also penetrated through the layers of obstacles. The woman looked elegant and generous. Her eyebrows were raised, showing a bit of heroic and forthright spirit. Wang Lu felt that she was quite familiar, but he couldn't remember where he had seen her. And at this time, the woman's figure flashed and directly crossed several miles and appeared in front of Wang Lu. The speed of her figure greatly surprised Wang Lu, but what surprised him even more was what followed. "I can't believe you're here." As soon as the woman opened her mouth, all the hair on Wang Lu's body stood up, because this voice couldn't be more familiar. Just a few days ago, the owner of this voice was the enemy that he focused on. It was the master of Palace of Heaven, Moonless Harmonious Sky. In an instant, Wang Lu didn't have time to think too much. He didn't have time to think about why Moonless would appear here at this time. why the half-skeleton half-beauty would suddenly restore the left half of her body, and why she dared to find trouble with him in Sky City at this time. In a flash, a moment of delay was enough to be fatal. Wang Lu immediately channeled his primal chaos heaven-splitting sword qi, ready to erupt his full power. Although in front of a Taoist master of deity stage, such power was probably insignificant, he had to buy time for Lu Li. However, Moonless' action was far faster than him. The speed of a Taoist master of deity stage was too fast, even faster than Wang Lu's thought. While the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword qi was still brewing in the king pill, Moonless had already rushed over. And then with a few words she shocked Wang Lu so much that he forgot to resist. "Sister Wu, I missed you so much." Chapter 560. Sister Wu? The familiar address and the familiar tone made Wang Lu, who had been on the battlefield for a long time, feel a chill run down his spine. But at the same time he forced himself to calm down. His face remained expressionless, and his heartbeat and muscle reactions were perfectly controlled. No matter how much information was contained in the word Sister Wu, now was not a good time to process it. Moonless was right in front of him, and he had to at least get through this hurdle first before considering other things. Right now, Moonless was smiling like a flower in his bosom. Her face brimming with enthusiasm was overflowing with happiness. It was hard to imagine that just 10 days ago, this was still a horrifying face that was half alive and half dead. Countless people would tremble with fear because of a slight tremble of her eyebrows. But Wang Lu did not dare to be careless, because since she could turn from a living dead into a beautiful girl in a few days, it was hard to guarantee that she would revert to her old ways in the blink of an eye. Now she was calling him Sister Wu affectionately, but in the next moment, she might turn the other party into ashes with a cold snort. Therefore, Wang Lu had to deal with every reaction, not only for himself, but also for the girl who was crossing the tribulation in the room behind him. However, in the face of a sudden hug, what kind of reaction could be regarded as the right one? Was Moonless throwing herself into his arms showing her true feelings, or was it a realistic disguise? After all, this was Sky City, and if she acted too presumptuously, she might not be able to bear the consequences. There were too many unknowns, making it difficult for him to decide. Should he smile and hug Moonless or coldly refuse, or simply take out the sword of Mount Kuan and fight to the death? Every choice seemed to be somewhat reasonable, but there were also great hidden dangers. In a flash, Wang Lu made a balance in his heart and decided to deal with it in the middle. So he made a response that could be called omnipotent. Neither salty nor weak, neither servile nor overbearing. No matter how many changes you make, I will just hee. It was not a delicate response, but it was a supreme weapon to delay time and lead the conversation to the next stage. Sure enough, Moonless didn't care too much after listening. Instead, she rubbed against Wang Lu's arms like a spoiled child and made a lazy nasal sound. Wang Lu broke out in a cold sweat again. Right now he was wearing the appearance of his master, Wang Wu, by relying on a wonderful illusion technique. Although the illusion technique was exquisite and could perfectly simulate the sense of touch, so the sense of touch that Moonless was experiencing must be very good. It was, after all, an illusion technique. With a Taoist master of deity transformation at such a close distance, Wang Lu really did not have the confidence that he would not be seen through by the other party. Fortunately, Moonless really didn't seem to have any wariness towards her. After dawdling for a while, she raised her head and said, "Sister Wu, I'll come find you again tonight, okay?" Wang Lu muttered to himself, not in a hurry to answer. In fact, he really wanted to nod his head and say, "No problem. You can come tonight. I'll leave this afternoon." But if he answered too eagerly, he might reveal a flaw, so he had to keep her in suspense. Sure enough, as soon as he muttered, it was Moonless' turn to be anxious. She hugged Wang Lu's arm and shook it back and forth. "How about tonight? It's rare for me to come to Tsongtian City." Wang Lu didn't even have time to savor the touch coming from his arm. All his mind was used to analyze the next countermeasures. Judging from the current dialogue, the strength and weakness between Moonless and Sister Wu, or the contrast between the offensive and the defensive, was clear at a glance. That majestic vassal lord of Chaotian Palace had been trained by Sister Wu into a weak and vulnerable appearance, so he had a lot of room for mediation at this time. As long as he didn't reveal any obvious flaws, the initiative was in his hands. Tonight, Wang Lu deliberately frowned, and then under the eager eyes of Moonless, he slowly nodded. Maybe I can. I have something to do right now, so you go back first. If I have time in the evening, I will look for you. Then, facing the pleasantly surprised look of Moonless, Wang Lu revealed a smile and then waved his finger, making a vague gesture of telepathic finger. Moonless let out a soft, looking as if she was about to faint from happiness. Her face was flushed and her eyes were filled with tears. I am so happy. With that said, she covered her face and said in a sacrificial voice, You wanted me to give up the Deathine body and made the cultivation I've cultivated for dozens of years go down the drain. But you gave me double the happiness. Thank you, Sister Wu. After that, she turned around and left. Sister Wu, I came to Tsangtian City this time to attend a temporary meeting. I'll be in Chaotian Guild Hall these days waiting for you. And at the last moment before she left, her eyes were still locked on Wang Lu's outstretched finger, reluctant to part. When Moonless' figure flickered and disappeared, Wang Lu just wanted to stick 2 fingers into his own eyes. This play was really too beautiful that no one dared to watch. To be honest, the scene of a young girl yearning for love was actually quite pleasing to the eye, especially when the one in love was a beautiful girl with outstanding appearance. But as long as one remembered that not long ago, she was half alive and half dead, and half of her face was white, no matter how beautiful her appearance was, it would be greatly reduced. What's more, the other party was a vicious and merciless deity stage vassal lord. Compared to the innocent girl life and death, yin and yang, they were the opposite. Of course, what made people want to poke their own eyes even more was the way she called him Sister Wu. The world was so big, and there might be thousands of Sister Wu, but there was probably only one Sister Wu who could make a deity stage vassal lord change the world in just a few days. Even Wang Lu himself at this time sincerely felt admiration for Sister Wu's remarkable ability. Dear Sister Wu, in the face of such a person, how could you do it? Is the telepathic finger completely not screening the target? Even the living dead, your taste has already broken through the core of the earth. And what are you planning to do with such a skill? Seduce a rich woman to subsidize your family? TSK. No wonder Hua Yun has the best relationship with you among the elders of Heavenly Sword Hall. It seems that your sisterhood is really deep. As for Ao Guanhai, who also has a good relationship with you, I'm afraid it's just a kind of mutual appreciation between people with great tools. Alas, Sister Wu, when your brother Ouyang Shang gave you all his inheritance, including his magical wisdom and perception, it was not for you to invent these strange and obscene skills. Moreover, when I wanted you to live happily, I didn't want that innocent girl who was infinitely devout to the immortal path to become like this, using her enthusiasm to develop skills to make people happy. It was just that, thinking to this, Wang Lu could not help but feel a pain in the ass. Sister Wu. Alas, I can't believe I can meet my dear Sister Wu in this kind of place. How King elusive are you? What are you doing here instead of idling around in the Spirit Sword Mountain? No matter how I look at you, you don't look like the kind of person who is diligent in the instance. What was even more strange was that the group of old guys in Heavenly Sword Hall actually dared to let her out. Moreover, they even let her go to the Fengdu Immortal Tombs. Weren't they afraid that she would do something that would bring shame to the Lingjian school for 100 years under the eyes of the Wanxian League? For a time, Wang Lu's thoughts were in a mess. However, after thinking for a while, he could only secretly sigh. To put it bluntly, he was still panicking, because he was not ready to meet Wang Wu again. He intended to calm his mind through a period of actual combat training, and then find a suitable opportunity to meet Wang Wu in a suitable way. Of course, what was the appropriate standard? That was yet to be determined. In any case, now was definitely not the right time. Unfortunately, regardless of whether Wang Lu was suitable or not, Sister Wu was already approaching. Moreover, it was likely that she had already learned of his existence and might appear in front of him at any time. He walked in the heavenly earth with the face of Wang Wu. Thus, when he also entered the heavenly earth and encountered Moonless, Wang Wu would inevitably realize that someone was acting in her name, considering that the existence of Lu Li had also been exposed. Thus, a simple inference. Who would walk in the appearance of Wang Wu and be followed by Lu Li? The answer was clear at a glance. Thinking of this, Wang Lu could not help but feel a bit impatient. Even a few days ago, when he had just entered Sky City with Lu Li, the situation had not yet stabilized, and he might be chased by Moonless at any time. He did not feel so uneasy. Ai little Lu Li, hurry up and reach the core formation stage. After that, let's go, the further the better. With his back to the training room, Wang Lu softly sighed. However, the next moment, a sneer came from behind him. Go? Where are you going, little Wang Lu? Wang Lu's body instantly froze. Even when Moonless threw herself into his arms with the face of a young girl in love, he did not feel so shocked. However, Wang Lu was indeed Wang Lu. He possessed one of the best mental state among the king pill cultivators. Without any instruction, his non-phase immortal heart madly operated and controlled all the emotional fluctuations of Wang Lu. Calm, he must be highly calm. The strength of that person was far stronger than him, and now that person appeared behind him like a ghost. It could be said that he had the upper hand. In this case, if he wanted to escape, it would be as difficult as ascending to heaven. Most of his skills came from her teaching. Thinking of the rich inheritance that she inherited, as well as the 150 years of long cultivation time, Wang Lu did not feel that with his current middle-level king pill cultivation base, he was qualified to compete head-on with the famous #1 king pill in 9 regions. Therefore, the only way to win was to take an unconventional approach, and it must be the kind of unconventional approach that could make the opponent feel shaken. In a flash, Wang Lu had thought a lot and made his own response in the first instance. He turned around with a smile on his face and directly threw himself into the arms of the person behind him. Sister Wu, I miss you so much. Then in the moment when Sister Wu was stunned, Wang Lu lifted his foot and kicked, trying to escape by using the counterforce. This kick even contained primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi. Let alone wanting to kill you, it was more like wanting you to die. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.